I had a call a few weeks ago about a member of a Nash whose 11-year-old child is attempting suicide. And you get off a phone call like that after 40, I was in LaGuardia Airport. You get off a phone call like that, you're like, all bets are off.
Yeah, man.
So the business of changing perspective and recognizing that we have to go back to the core of basic midos, of basic avas achim. No one should have to wait till they're 35 or 30 and have gone through infertility and adoption and raising children with special needs and being on shlichus in Arei Asada to really awaken and realize that change is doable.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2025. My name is Bosi Lgani, and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty. We are here in Bozeman, Montana, with Rabbi Bruk.
L'chaim.
L'chaim Lavracha, Rabbi Chaim Shaul Bruk. And it's been a whirlwind few days of driving around the state and trying to capture a little bit the essence of what's been going on here the past 18 years. And I remember when you first went out, not that I was close to it, but I remember hearing about it, and I remember the meme of, Chaim Shaul going to Montana, becoming a shliach. Chaim Shaul, they made a state for him to be a shliach, and the typical kind of gossip and whatever. But it's nice to actually see it, and big asher for what you've been doing, and we'll get to that in a moment. But that's what brought me here. And the Olam demanded, why they have a right to demand, I have no idea, but they demanded.
They wanted to see if I'm homesick.
A podcast. No, you have to do a podcast. Why do I have to? Whatever, I have to.
When I moved out, Chesky Wolf, my classmate, my friend, said to me, he says, Chaim Shaul, when the New York Post is done writing the articles, you have to actually move there. The joke's going to be on you. Had shliach, Montana. There's a reality that's going to kick in.
Yeah.
Here we are, 18 years later.
Yeah. Look, some things start off as a joke, but then they get real. It was a good joke. Yeah. What's the price that you're willing to pay for a good joke? Could be a lot.
That question could be answered 18 years ago, and it's a very different answer today, and I'm not sure those answers line up at all.
Yeah.
There's the price you're willing to pay for yourself, there's the price you're willing to pay for your marriage, and then there's the price you're willing to pay for your children, and that's a whole different subject, which...
We'll get into it.
I'm told that this has been discussed before, but about the idea of what the price our children pay in the realm of shlichus.
You're saying on the podcast? Yeah. But... look, we can hear from somebody else. We don't have to only hear from me or whoever else. We'll see where it goes. But before we continue the conversation, whoever listens to this podcast and enjoys this podcast, would be wonderful if you could drop a like on the platform you're listening to it. It really does help with the algorithm. And if you really enjoy the podcast, and if you really enjoy the podcast, would much appreciate if you contribite to the podcast. I was
going to say, make a donation, guys.
There you go. He's a fundraiser.
He's beating around the bush. The guy needs money.
If you really appreciate the podcast, please go to hflpodcast.com/donate. Somebody today told me he didn't know there was an option. Okay, so now you know there's an option. Let's see if it makes a difference. Alrighty, not to the real business or to the pleasure. So I've seen over the past few days a little bit of what you're up to here, and a little bit the difference or what makes Montana special. But for people who weren't here or haven't been here and are listening and watching the podcast now, why don't you take us back to... Actually, why are we starting with shlichus? Why don't you take us back to growing up in Crown Heights? Let's go to the beginning.
So, I was born in Tafshim Beis. I was born in 1981, December of 81. My first Tanya I got from the Rebbe, I was 4 months old, Alf Nissen Tavshim and Beis. I don't know what God-forsaken hour. My mother schlepped me on the line. I think it was in the wee hours of the morning by the time her turn came around.
Your mother brought you?
Yeah.
Oh, because you're a baby.
I was 4 months old.
Right, yeah, your mother's bringing you.
And the first, I was 12 years old at Gimel Tammuz. My bar mitzvah was Kislev Nun Hey. So the first 10 years or 9.5 years of my life was with the Rebbe pre-Chav Zayin Adar.
Right.
Incredible years. I know everyone has a sob story about their childhood, or a lot of people do. I really don't. I loved growing up in Crown Heights. I loved going to Old Torah. It had its flaws. It had its, there were better years with better teachers and some years with not so better teachers.
Right.
But overall, I had an incredible experience. I had great friends. Probably from my top 10 closest friends, 8 of them are probably from those years growing up, meaning childhood friends that I've known now for 38 years. The streets of Crown Heights were different. They weren't cleaner. The 770 didn't talk less. Not everything was hunky-dory back then, but there was something incredible just growing up with the Rebbe. And, we were not such big hot chassidim, so we did go for every kuntres, and we did get every opportunity. We didn't go to dollars every Sunday, but we went enough. And I wasn't, my parents were not, the ones that, we didn't live in 70, 18 hours a day. And my father had we used to daven Shabbos morning at the Agudah Shul on Crown Street so that we can have a normal Siddur Shabbos before my father ran to Fabrengen. So Friday night we daven in 770, Shabbos day in Agudah and then Fabrengen. But I didn't sit at Fabrengen when I was 7 and 8 years old. But the big things, Hakafis, Yom Tovim, the Seder Negudim by the Yom Tovim like Rosh Hashanah and Simchas Torah by the end of the Yom Tov. Those are memories that are etched in my mind. I live with it every day, and therefore I was just old enough for Chav Zayin Adar to break my heart, and obviously for Gimel Tammuz to take a different type of toll. There's the toll that Gimel Tammuz took on the Bachrim that were 25 years old. There was the toll it took on the 20-year-olds, and then there was the hope that was shattered on so many levels for the 10 to 14-year-olds. Who were really tag-alongs. We tagged along to Beth Israel Hospital. We tagged along to the beepers going off, and we didn't. Not all of us had beepers, so our older brothers had beepers, and we ran along. And then that world came to a crashing halt, and it didn't. I don't want to use the word trauma because it's overused all the time, but it affected us deeply. I'm grateful to my parents. Right after Gimel Tammuz, they did not cancel my trip that summer.
To camp?
No, I was going to South Africa to spend a month with my cousins, the Goldmans in Johannesburg.
Right.
And I was for Shloshim, I was in Johannesburg. I still remember, I believe Rabbi Lipsker and Rabbi Goldman.
So how old were you again?
12.
12, so before Bar Mitzvah.
It was the summer before my Bar Mitzvah was in Kislev.
And so your parents said, just go on with life.
Yeah. Well, they didn't say go on. I had first cousins who were Bachrim who didn't leave the cemetery, the old Montefiore cemetery near the oil, for weeks on end. And I don't know it's not a blame game. It is, people did what they did. I needed to, or they felt that I should just continue with my summer plans. And I'm grateful that they did that.
Right.
I'm not sure what keeping me around would have done different and what infusing sadness, superficial sadness from the outside in is not really a thing.
Right.
And my parents did want to keep some level of stability and sanity in our lives. The Bar Mitzvah was tough to pull off. It was in the year of Avelus, and we took the year of Avelus of Tafshin and Dalet into Nun Hey seriously. But my parents looked back at some of the instructions that the Rebbe had given my grandparents, Shimon and Esther Goldman, about various simchas, and decided that we're going to still have a proper Bar Mitzvah simcha celebration with music and everything at Lubavitch Yeshiva, which, again, I'm grateful for. But that was the era in which I grew up. So, 9.5 years pre-Chav Zayin Adar, 2 years of along with everyone else going through the whole Gesund era, which in itself, in retrospect, some people look back at the Gesund years, the Rebbe's health, struggling, with all these mixed emotions about, what we could have done better with the Rebbe's health, what we could have done better with this or with that, and everyone has philosophies from here to Timbuktu. And actually, over the last 5 to 6 years, I've looked back at those 2 years in particular with a deep sadness, not necessarily because of what the Rebbe was enduring, but because of the infighting and the machlokes that was imposed on us young people.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a particular person to blame. I have an entire movement that I have challenged about this issue, that we were 12 years old in school, 11 years old, and we were arguing and fighting, taking sides on a machlokes that was so out of whack, so out of our wheelhouse.
Right.
We had no business even talking about, certainly not having opinions about, but we all did. And it was grotesque.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like you're saying one side was right and one side was wrong. Like
for years, obviously, I thought
right.
my side was 100% right. And by the way, from an analytical, from a historical perspective, I do believe there was one side that was more right than the other.
Right.
But how things were, how we went about things,
right.
and the divide that it created, and the animosity that was induced, was not only unhealthy. You know, it's one of those things I've thought about a lot, because if you read, and I do occasionally on a Shabbos afternoon, I pull out a Likutei Deburim, or I was with my wife for our 18th wedding anniversary last year. We went away on vacation. You're allowed to say that shluchim sometimes go on vacation. We could talk. We could analyze.
People have problems with it.
Yes.
It's more. My question was, where do you go on vacation when you live in Montana? How do you get away from Montana? Like, where do you go to relax?
Where I go is not going on the podcast.
All right, we'll say that.
But I need to have some secret places I can still go to.
No, I'm just trying to understand it. If people go to vacation to relax.
The one thing we don't have in Montana is ocean. So we try to go somewhere where there's an ocean.
Fair.
We have mountains, we have rivers, we have lakes.
Fair.
We don't have oceans.
And people. And people.
I go to places without people too.
Beaches without people.
I don't want to see people. Beaches, you can't go if there's people. It defeats the whole purpose.
All right.
I'm a frum Jew.
Yeah, right. Keep it a secret then.
But the so I was away with my wife, and punk that week in the Chayenu, Shleisha Prakim Chayenu, they had in the back the translation of part of the Cholzu.
Right, yeah.
On Shabbos afternoon, I'm sitting and reading it, because, when you finish all the parts of the Chayenu that are obligatory, you get desperate in the 6 hours left to Shabbos.
You didn't bring a Mishpacha magazine with you?
I did not. It's over. It makes the suitcase overweight. They're so heavy, the magazines these days.
I hear the Mishpacha magazine sets off the security in the airport.
Because it should.
It's been flagged by the TSA.
Along with Ami.
Yes.
Yeah, someone came for Pesach. My sister was here for Pesach. She brought out the magazines for Yom. I'm like, that's a suitcase in itself.
Yes.
Right outside. Who has time for this stuff?
Yes, it does not belong. It does not.
Although in the Ami magazine for Pesach, as a side note, there was an article about Menachem Zemba, the great Rosh Yeshiva from Poland, who was at the Rebbe's Chasana.
Right.
And I was this close to writing a letter to the editor that they wrote a 6-7 page historical biography of Menachem Zemba, Hashem Yikim Damai. And there was no mention. There was his connections to everyone except to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and there's many letters in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Igros.
Right.
And that he was at the Rebbe's Chasana, and so I decided I don't have time to write letters to the editor of the Ami magazine.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying there was something to read in the magazine. I just don't get it. So I was reading the Chayenu, back to the Chayenu.
Yeah.
And I'm reading the Cholzu, and it talks about why we get upset about people and angry at people when they have differing opinions than us. And I'm reading it's about Schwarzenegger. Like, I was trained, not by anyone lecturing to me, but the osmosis. I was trained by osmosis that if someone disagrees with you, that find him, you gotta hate him, and you gotta not talk to him.
That's Crown Heights or that's Detroit?
It's a mixture of both. I got it from both sides. So I grew up in Crown Heights, and I grew up in an era where. And I don't want to go into the particular names, but if you starting in the late 80s, there were certain names, and you really thought that if you met this person, you were going to meet the devil.
Right.
Then in later years, I went to various yeshivas, and I don't think Detroit was I don't think Detroit induced it. It was hanging out with certain segments of people maybe associated with Detroit, but it wasn't the yeshiva. Rabbi Gerari in Detroit and Rabbi Steinmetz in Detroit they were not into. They never spoke negatively to me about political stuff.
Right.
Maybe they spoke negatively about worldview, black and white, but not machloikas. It was infused. It was in the avir. It was in the coffee we drank.
Right.
And I'm reading the Seichotz, and I'm like, this is crazy. This is all about ego. And I start reading on. I'm like, it's mamish. It's not someone else's story. This is my story.
Right.
And it came punkt b'ashgacha. It came mamish b'ashgacha pratis. I had just been invited. going back to your original joke about the head shliach, I got invited to the America's head shliach meeting that was in September in El.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to go.
That does in fact exist.
Once every 18 years, be'erich.
He told me he told me about it, and I was like, no, this is myth.
I actually said this to your uncle Yuri. He represented Pennsylvania. Anyhow, I'm sitting. So I was invited to come. I really had no interest in going because.
Side note: when Canada becomes a 51st state,
Canada was invited to this.
But when Canada becomes a 51st state, how does it work? Who becomes the head shliach of Canada? The entire Canada.
I would say Professor Block, but he's not.
It's your wife's grandfather. Yeah.
No. But I really didn't want to go to the meeting. When I moved to Montana, I know it sounds funny, but when I moved to Montana, I really became all absorbed in Montana. Right. Jews of Montana, shlichus in Montana. Sure, I write an article in the Five Towns paper in New York, so I have a crowd there that I'm very much connected to. And Chavie has a podcast, and it's not like I'm hiding in Montana. But my focus has always been the growth of Yiddishkeit in Montana, and I could not imagine what me attending a meeting with a bunch of other head shluchim could accomplish for Montana in any way.
Right.
But I got a phone call or two of people asking me to come. People maybe perhaps are related to me, and it would really be a good idea if you came. And I really was hesitant. And then I read the Hicholzu thing, and I said, you know what? I can't really justify not going, because the reason I'm not going is because I have a disliking for this one or for that one, or I have an opinion that I created about one person or another, and I have allegiances. And the bottom line, it was all
right.
None of it came from the Nefesh Elokis.
Right.
So right there, I said to Chavie, I said, Hicholzu just sent me to the head shluchim meeting,
right.
And I went, and I'm glad I did. I'm not sure there was an outcome of any kind, although there was an interest in maybe an outcome. I don't think there was like a big poil yetza. But I went, and the greatest accomplishment of being there was that I ended up conversing and farbrengen with people who in my life I could have never imagined me farbrengen with, talking to, feeling comfortable having those conversations, feeling like the conversations were legit and real and authentic. And I'm 40, at the time I was 42 years old. So it was like this realization, like, it's okay, you're 42, and for many decades of your life, you believe that the way to interact with fellow chassidim was as if it's a war zone, right?
Yeah.
Either you're with us or against us. Like Bush spoke about Iraq,
Right.
We're going to smoke you out of your pits. And, we have the Brukshaft, and we're coming, and we're going, and we're fighing. And obviously everything's in the name of the Rebbe. No one ever had a fight in the history of...
you brought up the Brooks. It's not like your family's on both sides of this, isn't it? You have family on both sides.
Perhaps, but there's no in-family debates on these subjects. We don't bring it up at family dinner.
No, I'm saying my point is not to schlep your family into it. My point is that like this fight really cut through people. Like it cut through families.
It cut through everything.
It cut through everything.
Everything, and with the biggest bread,
I wasn't even there, but it was. It's funny because this conversation that you're bringing up now, someone brought up to me, I think off the air, we didn't put it on the podcast, but they were on the other side of it. On the other side, and they said the same exact thing. They said like they're looking back and they're like, what was wrong with the community that you have kids? There was once a moment where one of the, I'm not going to say
names.
Yeah, but there was one of the leaders of one of the sides, there was a rumor that he had been killed in a car crash. And the kids who were on the other side were dancing in school because they heard that this guy was killed in a car crash. And like they're looking back and they're like, "What the hell was going on?"
So I don't know the particulars. That sounds even extreme for what I grew up with. But it goes back to, and I've asked this a lot of times over the last couple of years, is that when you read Sefer Zechronos, or you read Likutei Deburim, or honestly, you don't have to go. Even if you just read through the Rebbe's Farbrengens, and you see conversations about the concept of Midas Tovus,
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work for you, you could always go back to Dr. Miros. I mean, whatever works for you to realize that the ideas of Midas Tovus, Midas Hagunos, what defined the chassid, based on the Rabbeim's teachings, what defined the chassid, amongst other things, was the most unique character traits and Midas that reflected love and sensitivity and empathy and kindness and mercy. And you go even further, I mean, all Jews are officially Rahmanim, Baishanim.
Right.
And then you see this insanity.
Right.
For me a little bit, right now in the last decade amongst Ger chassidim, you see a level of rishus coming against Reb Shaul Alter and his chassidim.
Right.
And I'm looking at that from the outside, I'm like, it's horrible. And then I look at myself, I'm like, I'm so glad, it's better late than never. I'm glad that, somewhere in my 19 years of marriage, Chavie grew up in Texas. She grew up as a shlichus. She doesn't know from any of this. The first time she heard of any remote machloikas was when I was dating her, and I made sure when we were dating to...
That she was on the right side of it.
Not on the right side, but she's the educator. It's a minute. You're dating a girl. You can't marry
Right.
So I'm sitting on the Riverwalk in San Antonio educating her, but now we joke about it. But and you think to yourself, what is that, number one? And forget about, if you're not into biblical commandments of Lashon Hara, the Chilus, Dvar B'Telim, and Perek Alf and Tanya, about the Mishiyesh B'Yali Vilmud, right? Okay, you don't want to go there, it's too holy for you. At least as a chassid, A, emulating the Rebbe, and B, where did those Midas Taigas go?
Spring is here, which means that in 2 months, many communities will be looking for a way to mark Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe's yahrzeit. If you're looking for an event that is memorable, meaningful, and affordable, let me recommend This World is a Garden, a film and live concert production created by us here at Yuvla Media, inspired by Bosi Lgani, the first mimer, the Rebbe said. If you're a regular here at HFL, you know that Bosi Lgani is something that we think about and talk about a lot. And in this production, we use the power of cinematic filmmaking and a live concert by a string quartet to bring the beauty of Bosi Lgani to your community and your audience in a way that they've never seen, heard, or experienced it before. The production has already been hosted by Chabad houses around the country and has drawn wonderful reviews. Our package comes with everything that you need to put in the production: the film's original arrangements for string quartet, publicity materials, everything besides the string quartet, which we recommend that you hire locally to save on travel costs. To find out more about this production, please visit thisworldisagarden.com. Again, thisworldisagarden.com. And now, back to the show. I think there's even a simpler barometer, especially when you grow up on shlichus, or when you're on shlichus, is that, what would you be comfortable having this conversation in front of Baal Batim? And the answer is almost always an emphatic no. There's no way. I mean, there are certain things, like, it's not like you have to be some kind of pushover in front of Baal Batim. Like, there's sometimes you have to stand up strongly for something, and really, it doesn't make a difference if they care or not. But usually, if it's for the right cause, then it's a right cause, and people respect, fortitude.
Principled people.
Yes. But this, I don't know anyone. No, and you see it also. There are a lot of kanoim that the second that they're in front of the Baal Batim, or the second they're in public, it's a whole different story. And I think, like, that's just a simple barometer that we've lost your way, because you've gotten basically swept up in this environment that allows you to act in a way that you would never act in front of other people.
And a language that we would never speak.
That's what I'm saying.
If we saw our children talk like that about a fellow kid,
right,
we would have a conversation with them at a minimum to say that's not how a Jew talks, that's not how a chassid talks. And yet, in the name of the Rebbe, which is the biggest sadness of all of it, is that he was schlepped into all these so-called religious zealot, things we're fighting for in the name of the Rebbe. And by the way, I do believe that there's historical facts,
right,
and they don't always align, and they don't always shine beautifully on every person. There were people, and there still are people, because they are by definition people, which means all of them make some mistakes, some of them make more than others, who did things that were wrong.
Right.
I study history to the best of my ability. I have family relationships and allegiances. I still have a deep reverence for people like Rebbe Ephraim and Berke Wolf, for people like Rebbe Label Kaplan and Tzfas, people who really stood at the forefront of building Chabad in Eretz Yisrael, Shlem Kamadanchik. And there were people that hurt them, and it bothers me. But when it used to bother me, I went to war over it. And I made sure, and every time I saw them, or every time I spoke about them, or their name was mentioned, you have to,
your blood pressure has to go up.
Let's just say there was the Chavie, when they mentioned Chavie, we made sure they were Zachal Atayv, and when Haman's name was mentioned, we made sure to boo.
Right.
But then, again, you go back to the questions like, go to Hechaltzu.
Right.
What is this? Where do these midas megunos come from? Right, and by the way, I sat at Fabrengens when in Montana we don't sit at a lot of Fabrengens, at least not where I'm listening. If anything, I'm talking. I don't recall many Fabrengens, and I sat through from Michigan to Morristown to Montreal to Lud. I've been around the block. I don't recall many Fabrengens where the Mashpiyim were discussing the refinement of character traits. I remember the Rebbe being thrown around, the Rebbe, shlichus, the Rebbe, which, by the way, at the right time, in the right place, in the right limitations is a wonderful thing, but you're raising a generation of kids who were never educated with midas. Okay,
so you're already leading to an answer, which I happen to agree with. But so if I probably would have, if I was answering the question, I probably would have gone in the direction myself, to be honest. But to open it up a little bit, you're suggesting there is a simple kind of or direct explanation that you could start exploring, which is what happened in that era that caused that kind of chaos that then allowed for people to lose their minds and lose their bearings, where you would talk about someone who was your neighbor or your relative or used to be your friend. This tore brothers apart. This tore families apart. This tore neighbors apart. And in vicious ways, what happened in that moment that caused that? And you can start exploring it as an incident that caused it. I think there's value in exploring that, but I've always maintained that, I wasn't there, so it's more like a speculation, but it's from what I've heard and from what I gather, that it didn't start there. The people the fact that people lost their bearings in such a crazy way, to me, is not just a traumatic event. Because I think ultimately a traumatic event, usually people get their bearings back. You could lose your mind for the moment, but then eventually you come back to yourself.
Temporary insanity.
Yeah, no, people, God forbid, they lose a loved one in a tragic accident. They can act out in a terrible way, or they can lose their mind. Sometimes they have to be medicated even, right? But eventually most of the time you can come back. Here, there was something that endured. And so I do believe that something happened beforehand that led to it. And that's what you're talking about, which is already you're touching on it, which is at least something that needs to be explored, and we have explored on the podcast, is that when you believe that you can skip over the bread and butter of Yiddishkeit and Chassidishkeit, kind of the boring stuff, but they're boring, and they're like, whatever. Baal Teshuvos do that, It's for the Baal Teshuvos. We're already past that, like it's. Even use an example, like we're past Avos Yisrael for another chassid. We're past Achnas Tzarchim for the Lubavitcher who comes to town and seems like a bit of a nudge. We're past that. We're into shlichus, like Avos Yisrael and Achnas Tzarchim for people that we never met and never will meet again. It's like, wait a second, what about the basic?
So there's a couple of things. First of all, our Chabad house, just as a side note, in addition to our local community, we host hundreds, sometimes thousands of frum Jews every year for Shabbos.
Right.
And our motto has always been that just because they're from Lakewood or they're from Muncie and I don't like the brim on their hat or the chup on their hair, doesn't mean that I'm their judge. Just like I'm non-judgmental with the Eichlei Chazir, right?
Right.
I'm certainly not going to be judgmental with the person with the brim that I don't like, and they need to be welcomed and treated with the same love in our Chabad as every other Jew. But there's another nekuda which I think really goes to what you're saying, and that is there was a meeting of head shluchim. Maybe after this podcast, they're not going to invite me onto the head shluchim meetings anymore, and that's also fine. It's one less thing I'll have to do. But it was a phone call.
You're welcome.
Anytime. I'll pay you later. And it was a whole thing. I think it was Shnasa Me'ev Esrim, maybe it was Hakel, something that was somehow associated with Achdus. And I'm listening to colleagues talk about that bringing Yidden some oil, some Rebbe. It's a year of, I think it must have been Hakel.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Bring as many, all Yidden that bring, let's bring as many Jews, and I think it's a beautiful idea. Achdus, Hakel.
Right.
So when it was my turn, when it was all done, I unmuted myself and I said, I have just a question. Does this include shluchim that are 2 blocks away that we don't talk to?
Right.
Are they included in the Hakel Achdus program? Could we bring them along with us to the Rebbe too? And naturally there was radio silence. What was even worse than the radio silence was the multiple text messages and WhatsApps I got after thanking me for saying what I was saying. And I was like, you cowards.
Yeah.
Don't send me a WhatsApp message later privately. You're on a call. If you really believe that Achdus is vital, which by the way I do, and I proved it. I mean, we had some, in our family, we had some family feuds that I resolved because I stood here one Shabbos giving a sermon about forgiving. And I was like, I'm such a farce. I was walking home from Shul. I said to Chavie, I said, this is a joke. I'm talking about forgiveness. Meanwhile, our family doesn't talk to this one, to that one. Motzei Shabbos, I reconciled. And because I reconciled all my siblings, it became a family thing, and we all reconciled.
You had a grievance with someone in the family.
No, our family had a grievance with another family member, but we're a unit with the Brooks. We do everything in a unit.
I see.
And I said, I'm done.
Yeah.
And it changed the entire family reality for the positive.
Right.
And so I'm sitting here on this conference call and I'm talking about Achdus, and I'm like, my high, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
You're ready to go, like you said before, you're going to come with a private jet, you're going to land in Teterboro to go to the oil with the Grace Gvir. What about your brother down the block, who you can't do carpool with because you're not on talking terms?
Right.
Is that what Nasiderenu had in mind when he thought about Achdus and Hakel?
Yeah.
And so you're not going to talk to him in the name of the Rebbe?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't buy it. Now, when I was 17, I thought they were big chassidim, fiery chassidim. But I don't buy it. I don't buy it, and I think it's counterproductive. I think it's not what chassidus is all about. And, another thing you learn when you get slightly more mature is that I'm a loyalist. That's my natural inkling. So if you're on my team, I am loyal to you to a fault. The problem with that is if your friend gets you involved on his team in a machlokes and forgets to tell you that he made shalom with the guy.
You're still fighting.
He's still fighting. So I once came to the oil, this was about 15, 20 years ago, and a good friend of mine, I took one of my close friend's sides, and I wasn't talking to someone because he was in a fight with my friend. I walk into the oil, I see them talking to each other. So I walked up, I said, excuse me.
I've been fighting for you.
I am not talking to this guy because, we made up a long time ago. I'm like, I'm done. From then, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Mashiach doesn't come from machlokes.
Yeah.
Our shlichus and our love for fellow Jew is not limited to the people that show up in our Chabad al Shabbos morning. It's a biblical commandment for all Jews, and amongst chassidim, it's supposed to be even more so. I actually once called a shliach in a different state, and I said, do me a favor, I'm in Montana, I'm trying to bring Mashiach, I'm trying to move this thing along. Do you mind canceling your dentaitis for a few months so I could bring Mashiach? And then when Mashiach comes, you can go back. But it's really getting on my nerves that I'm trying to do mitzvahs to make it closer, and you're tipping the scale the other way.
Yeah, okay, but look, it's a lot of it's like sadly funny. Like it's funny in a very dark way. And I'm not above laughing at like the late sonness of it. But I think to be fair, like it goes a lot deeper than just people being silly and having silly fights, and it goes even deeper than saying, "Oh, people are fighting over a parnasa." And you have to understand, I really believe that it starts with a unwillingness to get real with the language that we use. I know it sounds like what are you talking about? This isn't some kind of philosophy. No, it's very, to me, it's very straightforward. When you use words that you haven't earned, when you just basically borrow these lofty ideas that you haven't reached, you haven't earned. For example, even the example that what I'm doing is the kavanah l'yena. How do you know? Right? You're jumping from something basic like kindness and empathy, sensitivity to something that is a divine, mysterious idea, right? And because the Rebbe speaks in that language, sometimes you speak in it willy-nilly, right? You brought up Hecholzu earlier. Hecholzu is a mimer printed in Ranat that any wannabe maskil in yeshiva, which there was a time that I was like that, you're learning the Hemshech Ranat, and you're like, wait a second, why do I have to stop my Gersa Skala of Malchus and Malchus? Nekevet to Seviv Gever and Miles Makabel, and you're getting carried away with yourself, and Hecholzu, because Hecholzu is not part of the Hemshech. Like, what's this about, right? And there's something about it where it's like, this is what it's about. You're getting carried away. Is one of the first Hemshechim of the Rebbe Rashab. It's one of the first Hemshechim he's delivering to Tenchet Mimim. This is Eli Rubin calls it the precursor to Samach Vav. This is when Chassidus is taking off on a jumbo jet, and mitamal you have to go to Hecholzu, right? I see it. I recently I've been here and there learning the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamarim, and you'll see that the Frierdiker Rebbe will be talking about this big haskalah. And then, how does it fear us in practical things? So, the famous example is Bosi Lgani, where it's about doing business honestly, showing up to davening with a minyan, and Kriyas Yitzim L'Torah. Dir B'tachtonim is Kafias Hapcha, the biggest things. What's the Evan HaBeichen? It can't be in the bosom, in Feglach and bosom. It has to be are you an honest businessman?
I'll tell you a cool story.
Yeah.
Didn't happen to me. It happened to my neighbor in Wyoming, to Zalman Mendelssohn. He once had Rabbi Moshe Feller come over to Fabring for Gimel Tammuz. And I hope Zalman doesn't hurt. He can't kill me. I'm a Bruk. But I'm just saying, I hope it's an incredible nakuda here. Talking about remembering the fundamentals. So it was Gimel Tammuz time, and Moshe Feller's coming to Fabring in Wyoming. So Zalman asks him casually, did you have a chance to read Rabbi Telushkin's book? And Moshe Feller responds, what? I'm still finishing Tikkun Lil Shavuos. He was on the plane, Erev Gimel Tammuz, landing in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with Tikkun Lil Shavuos, because he didn't finish on Shavuos.
Right.
That simplicity, that basic fundamental relationship with God, that got lost in the process of lofty terms and throwing the word Rebbe around as much as possible, is I think to the detriment of all of us. My Zayda Yechanan, who I never met, he passed away in Tafshin Chav Test. He was the Gabbai in 1970, and his kaver says Ish Pikach. He was a Pikeach. Yechanan Gordon. My Elta Zayda, my Bobby Goldman's father.
Right.
But I grew up with my grandparents Goldman, so I heard lots about him. He would wake up every morning at the crack of dawn, wee hours. He was a sheikhet, and he'd put in the tzedakah box, in the tzedakah pushka. He'd put in das avad the Tata Yisrael, for das avad the Mama, and das avad the Bruder. He would put in a coin in the pushka of each of his siblings. A simple act of basic Judaism.
Right.
A tzedakah in the tzedakah box. But he was also a guy that on Pesach, my Bobby always spoke about this, he used to make matzah brai every day. Fragt sich the student, the Gesheir, Yechanan Gordon made matzah brai? Yeah, with eggs and matzah. He never washed the frying pan all Pesach. He just used a napkin to wipe it. There was no shiloh of gibrux or anything. Right? So we got caught up in the chumras, right, and forgot about basic Judaism. And I don't have an opinion about people's chumras. Everyone could do whatever chumras they want. It's not I grew up in a home with schmaltz on Pesach, and we had our own although Rabbi Shusterman once told me that olive oil these days is the chumrah because it's there's less hands involved in dealing with it. But the nakuda is that you can have all the chumras you want as long as you don't forget about the fundamentals.
Right.
So if davening, if we got stuck on davening ba'avodah, but we forgot about the basics, which is davening.
Right.
We got stuck on the avodah without the davening. Mm-hmm. Or we think that because we learn Shleisha Prakim Rambam, we can't learn a Blad Gemara every day and be a typical Orthodox traditional Jew. Actually, not Orthodox, not traditional, just a Jew.
Yeah.
This is our Gemara. It doesn't belong to anyone else. It's ours. Right. Or if our Svarim Shaf is right, I still remember Bachrim, till today the Bachrim come into my library at my house and they see a Divrei Yoel on the shelf. Or they see a Yabi Oimer on the shelf. Like, what kind of Lubavitcher house is this?
Right.
I'm like, one with a rabbi who happens to like reading holy books.
Right. I'm
an Einikel of the Chidush Erim. We come from the Gerer dynasty through my Zayda Goldman. I told you this earlier today. My paternal grandmother, Chana Bruk, my father's mother, was an anacle of Rabbi Chaim Sonnenfeld and the Leva Ivri, Rakiva Yosef Schlesinger, Rabbi Hillel Kolomayer. These are people in the Yerushalayim world or in the Gera world.
So you're Kamal Lubavitcher.
From Mendel Brook and from Esther Goldman, I'm hardcore Lubavitchers, but they weren't married to each other. So I have one from one side, one from the other. I still remember, by the way, one of my brothers, I don't want to say his name, but a close friend and classmate of my brother used to, a whole day in yeshiva, he would talk about how he's Gezha.
Yeah.
So one day Yechanan came home, my older brother, and he said to my father, I don't know if he wasn't crying, obviously, but he was pretty upset. Like, why aren't we Gezha? My father said, we are. So he says, how come we never speak about it? Because evidently, if you're Gezha, you need to speak about it all day.
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, I married the Blocks. They're Bali Tshuva from Tennessee, from Zalman Posner's days. I think that we forget that to be a religious frum Jew is the foundation of becoming a chassid.
Right.
You know, when I looked around the Rebbe's room the few times that I've been in there, I looked on the shelves. I'm pretty sure, based on my assessment, that the majority of the Sfarim are not from Kahas.
Yeah.
Not that I have, you go get the whole Kahas library.
Right.
But don't limit yourself to that. You know, Rabbi Krinsky,
Well, I would also say get the Kahas library with the same discrimination that it would take to get other Svarim. Meaning, it's not a default, like the same way that you have to choose the Abiyah Eimer or the Divrei Yoel, choose which set of Mamorim you're getting or which Sefer of Mamorim
and whatever set you're getting, open them.
If you B'chal need to get a set, but like, you know, buy the Svarim with intention, you know, yeah.
Listen, I try, by the way, every once in a while, I open up the Sefer Mamorim of Admor HaZok in the red set.
Yeah.
I give it a shot every once in a while.
It's not for you.
It's not working yet. I try the Mamorim HaKetzorim. I try the Inyanim. Occasionally I see a one-liner.
See, that's what happens when you try becoming a mensch, is that you lose the gefühl for
the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim.
God forbid. But
no, I think that there's so much to be learned. There's so much to be learned. I remember once calling Yossi Jacobson, YY Jacobson.
Right.
And I said, Yossi, listen, next year, if you want a good sermon, to prepare a sermon for Sukkot, there's an incredible shalah. And I told him where to find it in the shalah. He said to me, that's great, it's awesome. Aber wie kommt a shliach in Montana and a shalah? I said, what, it's limited to only if you live in Muncie? You know, we had Sachagla and Yantif. What does the shalah say? What does it say in Bnei Yissaschar? I mean, there's beautiful Torah out there. Right. Beautiful Torah that our Rebbe adored. And again, I don't think one is a substitute for the other. But to be a well-rounded Jew does not minimize your iskashrus to Nesidirenu.
Okay, but I definitely agree with you. As anybody that listens to this podcast knows, I agree with you on this point. And I don't think there's a point of beating a dead horse. What interests me is, how did you get here? If we can get personal a little bit.
Yeah.
Because what you're describing as like the world that you grew up in was not unique to you, right? That was the milieu, and maybe not everyone got swept up in it, but a lot of people got swept up in it. And, you know, there are people who have, like yourself, looked back at it and said, look, this is crazy and we have to... But what do you think made that switch? Was it just growing up? Was it events?
The machlekes, the perspective of machlekes was a maturity thing.
Just maturity?
Well, maturity and a recognition that this is not in sync with what the Rebbe really... You know, you learn more and more of what the Rebbe says, it makes no sense. Also, I found something fascinating because
did it have to do with something in your own personal life?
Perhaps, and I'll get to that in a moment. I think that's a good point you make, and I'll see if I can put sense to that. I think what interests me always is I'm a big admirer. My parents were, my father is, my mother was, my grandparents were of Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky. Rabbi Krinsky was always someone in our family we admired immensely. His sensitivity, his delicate perspective, and all in Yonei shlichus from when I moved out, even though it's a little chutzpah of me, Rabbi Krinsky, even though we share a birthday to Zvav Kislev, and we call each other, I call him every year, but it was a chutzpah for me. He was probably 75 years old, 73 years old when I moved out on shlichus, and I'm coming to talk to him about issues in my Chabad house. He was always kind and responsive. But I discovered something. I'm defending Rabbi Krinsky. And there's never been one conversation I had with him, no matter how much I've trolled him, that he'll ever say anything negative about another Jew. Never. I can't get him to say a word. Even people that are making his life hard and miserable, he won't talk about them. He'll somehow, and so that had a big impact on me. because if you're the victim of a crime and you're not even talking about the criminals that are perpetrating it, then what am I doing?
Right.
But going to the personal stuff, I think everyone has their own personal journey. We have 5 adopted children. It's not a secret. The world knows that. Which obviously, if you have 5 not obviously, maybe it's not obvious, I'll say it for those that don't know. We did not choose to adopt children because that was our, when we were dating, we decided we're going to go the adoption route. It came with a diagnosis of infertility. We have 5 adopted kids. Adopted kids have their own set of challenges, each one in their own way. And then we have a child that has special needs that goes to Camp Simcha, that, our daughter Zizi, also not a secret. And there's no question that raising a child with special needs or being in a special situation, so you go through infertility, suddenly you now have this incredible level of sensitivity to other people that are going through infertility. And they're calling you for advice, right? We get calls, Chavie and I get calls all the time.
Homesick for Lubavitch is brought to you by Yuvla Media, a boutique video production company servicing the Chabad and Jewish community. Since opening 10 years ago, Yuvla Media has pushed the boundaries of artistic and thoughtful storytelling in the community, with an insistence on there always being a memorable story as well as a beautiful and striking visual image that we believe is second to none. Over the years, we have worked with Chabad organizations around the country, as well as large organizations like Boni Olam, Torah Masora, and Atzalathon, guided by the belief that your story is absolutely worth telling with depth and creativity. If you are looking to tell your story with a video, please reach out to us at hello@yuvlamedia.com. Again, that is hello@yuvlamedia.com. A link can be found in the show notes. And now, back to the podcast. Can we drill down on that a little bit?
Sure.
Take me back to when you first found out.
So we were
because I've done some work with Bnei Olam. I've met people,
amazing people. I was actually on the phone this morning at 8 a.m. with Rabbi Chaim Shaul Bruk. He's a dear friend.
Yeah, he's a good man.
He's a good man. He's a dear friend, and he takes his work as serious as we take our shlichus. His shlichus, and I see him. He takes his shlichus as seriously as I take mine.
That's no joke. No joke. The first project I did with Bnei Olam, which is one of the first projects I did, b'chlal, like in this position that I do now, which is making films for people, was a documentary about him and his wife. The reason he agreed to it was because he was being honored at a dinner. So the dinner chairs twisted his arm. So the title of the film was A Day in the Life of Rabbi Bachner. So I'm like, okay, Rabbi, I want to film.
I remember the film.
I want to film the day in your life. When does the day begin? He's like, cut it out. I get up at 4 a.m. I said, okay, I'm going to be at your house at 4 a.m. He's like, I'm going to be at my house at 4 a.m. As if I showed up at 4 a.m. He remembers it to this day. I showed up at 4 a.m. It was 4:30. He was up. He's sitting in his kitchen. It's on the video.
With the papers.
He's sitting in the kitchen learning a Gemara, but he's trying to learn Gemara, and he's on the phone with a doctor in Israel. Like he's nonstop. And he doesn't take a salary for this. He doesn't take a salary for this. He's figured out how to support himself with the business that he does or whatever. There's a Ibegebenkeit over there that's superhuman.
Beyond, and obviously we experienced that personally, so I'm very subjective about his incredible love for Klal Yisrael.
He's saying in the time.
When we went through our infertility treatment.
And that was, Bnei Olam was much younger back then, right?
We're talking about 18 years ago.
Yeah, that was much, but they were much younger.
So we got married in 2006. I was 24, Chavie was 21. A year later, we got married to Chav Beis Adar. A year later, Chav Gimel Adar. My shver asked me to stay in Koil for a year, so I didn't want it to be like Yitzis Mitzrayim. One extra day in New York, I can get stuck. So Chav Gimel Adar. Chav Gimel Adar. The next year, we moved to Bozeman, Montana. And everyone's saying, a year, 2 years, till 2 years. Rabbi Heller used to tell me all the time, Far 2 Jahr.
Yeah.
We knew something was fishy.
Right.
I kept. We're already now we're in Montana. There's no doctors here that know what they're doing, and at least then there certainly wasn't. So eventually we dealt with Bnei Olam, but by 2008 we already knew, which is because of the medical advancements, we knew that we came out of a treatment, a set of treatments, and we knew that according to Derech HaTeva, at least the way medicine existed back then, we're not going to have biological children. And I mean, obviously the devastation and the realization, and I was 26, Chavie was 25, 23. I mean, it's a wild thing to have to deal with.
You had no idea that this was coming?
No, not even remotely.
Right.
And we went to visit Shlomo Bachner in his office afterwards before we flew back to Montana, so it's like 3 weeks later. And we spoke to him about our options and adoption, and he didn't give us any definitives because he was smart enough not to do that. But we definitely felt like we had a guy in New York that was holding our hand.
Yeah.
And then we went into the whole adoption route.
People that don't know, he went through the same thing.
He did, and he doesn't. I'm not going to talk about Shlomo's story because let him talk about his story.
Right.
I don't want to mess up someone else's story and miss the details. But he definitely, yes.
No, I'm saying that people don't know about it. He
himself does not have biological children.
Yeah.
Correct. A lot of people that work in Bnei Olam are like that.
Yeah.
We came back to Montana. We had to, gather our bearings, figure out where we go from here. It was a very challenging reality.
I'm sure. How did it mess with your shlichus? Because I the story of infertility is sadly one that people are familiar with. I mean, to different extents. But how does it mess with your shlichus? You're already on shlichus. How does it mess with your view of the world? And let me flesh it out a little bit. Maybe I'm going a little bit too far with my question, but I think it's important to put it this way. Part of people have spoken on this podcast about the naivete that it takes to go on shlichus, which is we have the world in bud, we have it all figured out, right? And the world has questions. We have the answers. We're good to go. We just have to figure out some financials, but otherwise, philosophically, it's all figured out, right? There's that innocence, that naivete. And then you get this crushing thing where on one of the most basic things that we all take for granted in life, you got nothing, right?
Correct.
How did it mess with your concept of shlichus?
So the being in Montana actually had a few miles, just practically. You're not on Kingston Avenue all day watching the strollers roll by with your nieces and nephews that are 40 years younger than you.
Yeah.
I think the bigger question is how the emunah in the Eibishter remained intact or somewhat intact.
And the Rebbe also, and the Rebbe also, right?
So I have this personally. I have a very great bracha that I never have issues with the Rebbe. I don't. Some people, they blame all their, I don't have that. I think I have so much gratitude from what the Rebbe has given me, just on a very personal level. The simchas hachayim and the meaning in life that I find every single morning at 5 o'clock when I'm opening up the Rebbe, Teres Menachem. That in addition to my childhood with the Rebbe, I just think the daily meaning that is put in my life because of what the Rebbe and the gift that he gave me to be able to share a unique worldview with so many others. I mean, I'm not saying I don't have conversations with him. I sure do. And I'm not saying I don't let him know what I think. I do. But as a Jew, my job as a shliach was to share with the world the emunah and the Eibishter. Anechi Hashem Elokecha. Right? I remember Yossi Serabransky from Denver. There was someone posted a story on the Shluchim network. It said, there's a lady in my community didn't have kids for 200 years, and 15 minutes later, after she started using the mikveh, so he wrote, he says, because he struggled with infertility for many years, he wrote, just want to be ma'ir the olam that our shluchim on this network
have been using the mikveh.
That also use the mikveh. In my case, Chavie and I drove every month 7 hours each way to Salt Lake City for 2 years.
Yeah. And
they don't have biological children. Now, does that mean that there's no nisim that happened to Taras Mishpacha? Of course there is.
Right.
And ich vergin sie, God bless them. But to take the
I mean, the Rebbe also didn't have children.
Correct. And the hardship of standing up at a podium and saying that when you live a life of Torah mitzvahs, the Eibishter promises, L'siyam Shakela v'akara, everyone loves learning the Maimer, L'siyam Shakela. I'm like, let's have that discussion. Mm-hmm. I think that was hard. I think on some days it still is. Mm. But the alternatives, if you move away from emunah and the recognition that the Eibishter has Hashgacha Pratis and there's a plan here, In addition to the fact that in our particular life there was a plan. We adopted 5 kids that obviously needed our home. Whether it worked out perfectly or not, it's clear that they were dropped on my doorstep.
Right, but that's later on in the story.
Well, a year and a half later was the first adoption in 2009.
Right, but that's now all in hindsight. In the moment,
Yeah.
you're not thinking about that, right?
No, in the moment I'm putting up with people telling me every zgula. My mother sent me, I think, sand from Saudi Arabia or something that I should mix in applesauce. And by the way, I ate it. It tasted like applesauce, and we're still here to tell the tale. And then at a certain point, I'm like, stop inviting me for quartet programs. Stop giving me applesauce.
Right.
My father asked me if I'd go to Hadich with him because a close friend of his said that by the Alter Rebbe in Hadich there's a bracha for children. I said if we can fly Aeroflot and I can get Delta miles. At the time, Delta and Aeroflot were part of the same alliance.
Right.
So I said it with humor and sarcasm, but I did go to Ukraine with him because he told me to. There's a Lubavitcher in Crown Heights, a very, very special man who goes with Jungelite to the oil.
Right. Rabbi Zelickson, no?
No, someone else.
Uh-huh.
And officially there was a special bracha he had.
I see.
And I stood by the oil with him. I mean, I did whatever but
Rabbi Zelickson goes every year.
No. I went with this person, and then even there was a shliach who said to me, "Was heißt? There's a doctor in Yerushalayim that has special treatment. You should shut down your Chabad house and go to Eretz Yisrael for 2 years until you can figure it out." I'm like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to tell the guys, the only thing I have right now going for me is my marriage and my Chabad house.
Right.
Moving now from Montana to Yerushalayim.
I mean, that's what you found ridiculous about a statement?
No, I found ridiculous about a statement that A, I went to the best doctor in New York with Bnei Olam, and B, as the Eibishter will, can I bezen eichshissen, and the bracha will come from wherever it comes. Who are you, Bichlal, to meet me at the night of the banquet in 770 and whisper in my ear that I should move? Who are you?
Right.
You're not in my life.
Right.
I understand you experienced infertility too. It was someone that had experienced infertility, but that doesn't give you a blank check.
Okay, but I mean, I look, these people sound very annoying and I think to be fair, I think there has been a growing awareness of the sensitivity that's needed for this, because people have only found out in the past 10 years how real this issue is and how it's not like people are like this is real stuff. It's not hocus pocus.
But there's a lot of shame, meaning there's an assumption, for example, right? The Medrash says that Avram and Sarah were both Aker and Akara.
Right.
But in the frum world,
it's always a woman.
It's always woman's infertility.
Yeah.
And for
not just the frum world.
No, I'm just saying. But
in the whole world, that's a going assumption.
It's getting less and less. But I get calls often, and that's why I'm getting to the sensitivity part that you asked me about before. I deal with a lot of couples. I'm not Bnei Olam, but I just deal with them just preliminary. They have no idea where to start even, and I just like sometimes they don't want to talk to their family
about infertility or about adoption.
First, infertility.
Right.
They don't want to call their mothers.
Right.
They don't want to freak them out, and so they call me or they call Chavie. And what you learn in that process is that there's a lot of people struggling.
Yeah.
And when you see a person walking on Kingston or walking anywhere in Miami on Collins Avenue, you don't know really what's going on behind the scenes.
No.
And yet we're all judgmental. So the first thing that happens when you get involved in something like that and you become an address for those kind of phone calls, and then later that continues with phone calls about adoptions. Shluchim, people in their community, or Anash, or Lakewood and Borough Park, they call us too. I once had a Rachman Strifke chassid on the phone begging me for advice, and I kept saying the same thing. What does your Rebbe say? Does your Rebbe allow you to take a non-Jewish child and have them go through a Gir al Das Bezdin, to go through a child Gerus? He said, no, the Rebbe gesucht not a Yiddische. I said, can you tell the Rebbe in my name, take my name, Chaim Shaul Bruk, that I'm telling you, if you're going to demand only a Jewish child from birth, you're going to limit the possibility of adoption. There's just a very limited pool.
Right.
He didn't have the guts to talk to his Rebbe. I told one chassid, a Belzer guy, I said, please, the Belzer Rebbe doesn't know who I am, but if you get me on the phone with him, I will tell him myself with the greatest respect.
Right.
So there's a disconnect. And so you become empathetic and you become sensitive to the recognition of infertility, adoption, secondary infertility. Then you have a child with special needs. Then you have a child that has some emotional challenges or mental health challenges. And now people are calling you for that. I had a call a few weeks ago about a member of a Nash whose 11-year-old child is attempting suicide. And you get off a phone call like that after 40, I was in LaGuardia Airport. When you get off a phone call like that, you're like, all bets are off.
Yeah, man.
So the business of changing perspective and recognizing that we have to go back to the core of basic midos, of basic avas achim, right? You know, I have political, I don't even call it political, I have strong views on Meshachism. It's something I...
Yeah, for anybody listening to this podcast, Chaim Shaul's not a teddy bear.
Yeah, no, far from it. I'm a grizzly bear.
I'm saying, I can attest.
No, I don't want to give that impression at all. I don't want them to think...
Because if they're listening to you, all they're hearing is peace and love over here. But
No, so I have very, very strong opinions, even more than most of my friends and family.
Right.
The difference is that 20 years ago, those opinions meant that I needed to talk about it. And I needed to fight the enemy.
Right.
Now, when those same people call me, because we have this little thing called Vadrei Fiyadid that I run with three other shluchim.
Yeah.
Two of your neighbors.
Mendy Mangel.
Mendy Mangel and Shraga Sherman.
Shraga Sherman's my rabbi.
Right. And Shlomi Bishtritsky in California, the four of us. And we get calls from all over the world.
Right.
And I'm the secretary, so to say. So I man the calls and make the connections to the doctors.
Is it mainly for other shluchim?
It's for other shluchim.
Uh-huh.
Especially people living in Arei Asada where they don't have proper medical facilities.
Right.
When you take phone calls like that, so my point is that I can have a lot. I have very strong views about the whole Meshachism in Chabad.
Right.
And let's just say I'm not fond of it, and I'm not shy about saying that. But if a guy calls me on the phone and he's going through it, you think that comes into the? It's not even part of the.
No.
It's a brother who's in a terrible situation that needs love and care.
He's a husband. He's a father.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the theological differences that I feel very strongly about are not part of this equation. So I think, did I change my fierceness in policy, so to say? No. Actually, Chavie always says to me, you feel better now that you gave your opinion? Like you said it strongly, like you're ready. So my opinions are still strong. The difference is that you can have a strong opinion, you can study history from a certain angle and not feel the need to invoke inner wrath, inner anger, and to shoot down anything that stands in the way. And my wife actually had someone on her podcast recently who said that she quoted someone who said that, people always say, you trigger me, you trigger me, you trigger me. She says, trigger you, it means nothing.
Right.
Because if your gun wasn't loaded with bullets and gunpowder, it wouldn't explode. You would pull the trigger, nothing would happen. The fact that you exploded because they triggered you is what's going on inside of you, not because of the trigger. Right. And I think so much of it, I have to ask myself, okay, so they're doing something that I think, they believe in something that I think is absolutely ridiculous, or absolutely against Allah, or absolutely against everything that Rebbe stood for, everything my parents and grandparents raised me with.
Right.
Therefore what?
Right.
What will me screaming about it accomplish? What will me talking to a third party about it accomplish? It's not going anywhere. If I take that same energy and focus it on growing another Chabad house in Montana and hiring another couple and meeting another Jew, so did I change my Bulvanschaft? Yeah.
The Bulvanschaft changed.
Correct. The opinions didn't.
Yeah.
How you go about those opinions absolutely did.
Yeah. Yeah. Recently I started thinking about you talked about your relationship to the Rebbe through the things that through learning his Torah, and I understand where you're coming from, but to me, something that I thought about a lot more recently, it's been something I think thinking about recently, is that regardless of you could have questions about things that Rebbe said, you could have what was that about? What was this about? Things that bother you about how some things played out. To me, what I always come back to in those moments is, here was someone who had thousands of people come to him, either in the earlier years personally in Yechidus or later on with letters, and Pashut unburden themselves with tzaras that you can't begin to imagine. And the Rebbe would go and read these letters by the oil and spend hours reading them,
caring about them,
and and it's you cannot. This is not something to me. It's that's just okay. I don't understand. That's too big for me to
emulate.
No, it's not a matter of emulating. It's that's such a heavy thing that it's I can't touch it. That's the thing that just, meaning some people, when they have a shaila or a question, it's like the Rebbe's kluger. I think Isaac Humler said the Rebbe's smarter than you. You can answer your question with the fact that you don't understand it's because you're not so smart. The Rebbe's smarter than you, and that's one approach, right? And it's true. Like if you have a shaila about something, or something's bothering you, it's your problem. The Rebbe's smarter than you. But to me, it's more. The Rebbe's more is carrying a bigger peckle than you could ever imagine. The Rebbe was someone who took this on and listened to people. And that is something that just patience. Yeah, but I'm not even talking. I'm talking about the suffering that comes with that. You look at Bosi Lgani, and I maybe I'm a little bit guilty of talking about Bosi Lgani too often. And maybe people could suspect I'm trying to sell a program, but it's a reverse.
When I was in Montreal in Yeshiva, Naftali Prostin is a shliach in Montreal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for cutting you off. No problem. I'll never forget, he was fabreng with the Mesifta Bachrim, and Herschel Raskin was there, so I popped my head in.
Right.
And it was Yud Shvat time. He says, I heard everyone's excited. There's a new sefer on Memorim Bosi Lgani. He says, when are we going to figure out that he wasn't trying to print books, he was trying to make the world a gun? And I still remember, I was like, we're busy, let's chazer Bosi Lgani again, hello.
No, but that mimer is a real thing. Yeah, that mimer is a real thing. And the Rebbe is sketching the history of Lubavitch and trying to create a framing of where Der Shvi falls in. And he brings the 7 Rebbeim, right? First he brings the 7 Rebbeim's taich of Iker Shechina, and then he brings the 7 Rebbeim about what Dir B'Tachtenim is. Haskala. But then when it comes to how does it firais, what does it look like? What does he bring? He brings stories of Avos Yisrael. Chopping wood, and then the story of the Mitzvah Rebbe, where the Mitzvah Rebbe's skin is the pain, the physical burden, the physical pain of the spiritual issues that this chassid is going through, and the Mitzvah Rebbe is carrying that burden. The Mitzvah Rebbe was also known, he wasn't well, and he's still taking it on. It wasn't the Mitzvah Rebbe one also, or was one of the other Rebbeim who he would, between Yechidusin, would have to change his kapata from the Schwitz. And then someone told me a story recently where J.J. Hecht, when he was a bacher, so the Fidik Rebbe at the time was those later years, the Fidik Rebbe couldn't speak clearly, and so Rabbi Simpson used to be in there to tell people what the Fidik Rebbe was saying. Rabbi Simpson had to be away, and so he asked J.J. Hecht, who was a bacher, who I guess was close enough and familiar enough to Fidik Rebbe to do the same thing, to take the role. J.J. Hecht was there for one day and got ill from hearing what people were bringing to the Fidik Rebbe Yechidus. Got ill for 2 weeks, and he told Rabbi Simpson, never again. I'm not touching this again. And I'm bringing this all to say that, when you talk about Chassidishkeit and Chassidus and Mashiach and all these things, you remember that the Rebbeim as people who, they're the ones talking about this. These were not people who were aloof from society, who removed themselves from society and spoke on a megaphone from the mountaintop, from the ivory tower, right? These were people who were in the trenches with people and answering questions about
you name it.
Children. No, but not lofty spiritual.
No. My father, when I was a kid, wrote the Rebbe. I had a medical challenge. I think I was 3 years old.
Right.
The Rebbe wrote to my father, "Katzas Roifi did Feldman Shichya."
Right.
So not only don't go with. He told them which doctor, Moshe Feldman, Dr. Feldman, Dr. Right. Robert Feldman. Until COVID, I didn't know if I should get a COVID shot, and I was on the phone with Dr. Feldman. He's like, Chaim Shaul, I really don't know what to tell you, and I'm like, I'm not getting off the phone, Dr. Feldman. Until he says we don't have enough information. Then I think 2 months later, his son Hanan messaged me and said, my father says Johnson & Johnson, so that's what I did. My point is, to me, I always look back at them like, talking about Tafshim Mem Gimel, Mem Daled, like the Rebbe doesn't have enough on his plate, but he's not only giving the standard answer, Katzas Reifi
right.
did, but he's telling my father, I think in this case, you should go to this doctor.
Yeah, people showing bias, people's tzaras.
Look, my friends, the Sharfs. Mendel Sharf is my close, right. One of my closest childhood friends.
Right.
Look how the Rebbe spent his time with them.
Right.
Look at that sensitivity.
Right.
And there wasn't one day. It was from Tafshin Nun till Nun Beis.
Right. So even in these days, those days where they was talking about Mashiach in ways that people are, like romanticizing. No, but they was talking like in these atmospheric kind of language. It's always in the context. It's always framed by this down to earth sensitivity and real understanding of people's suffering.
Of the Yosem at the bottom of the stairs.
Of people's suffering.
Rabbi Gans told me once from Maristan, he was a former Satmar chassid.
Sure.
That before Mrs. Vechter and Rabbi Vechter left Williamsburg, the Rebbe asked Mrs. Vechter to leave a note. She was the principal of, I think, Beis Ruchel, whatever the name of the Satmar school was, to leave a note on the desk for the next principal of which kids in the school have which ones are Yisoimus, which kids have a medical issue, so that it shouldn't take 6 months to a year till the next principal figures out, right? So he said to me, Chaim Shaul, the Rebbe Liebge had Satmar Yisoimus, right? So we're dealing here in an era where the Lubavitcher's Pinya Korva's beard is going away.
And there was very sharp about Satmar. Of
course. And at the same time, right, there are Satmar children that need to be cared for by their principal, and that was what also on the Rebbe's mind at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that it's easy to have a Rebbe as a malach.
Right.
It's a lot harder to emulate a Rebbe who was malach Hashem tzvakos, but also as down to earth as it gets, and carrying the burden of his people, but all people that were connected to him in ways that are unfathomable.
Right. So let me ask a question that might sound very silly, but I think I can defend the question. As you gain this recognition, right, and you through maybe your own personal circumstances, and the people that you begin to hear and connect to as a result, you almost get involved in the more
I block it out.
Down to but you're saying you're getting involved in the more, like, people also, not that I understand it at all on the level that you do. I did not go through this personally, but from the little bit of work I've done, like, you go back to Rabbi Bachner, that story about Rabbi Bachner, like, he's sitting there learning Gemara. He's a chassid, above a chassid with the vest and the whole levush, okay, Blat Gemara, talking to a doctor in Israel about sperm.
Yeah.
Right.
That my conversation with him this morning was not much different.
Right, but he doesn't speak like that's the
world he's living in.
There are no better words or more halical words. And in a way, this is the holiest thing he could speak about, right? But it's, and what I'm saying that because, like, you're schlepped into a world that on the surface is very not ruchnisdik. It's very not Mashiachdik. It's very sad and depressing. Right? No, and it gets to push it to the gashmius of life, right? The mechanics of life, and it takes something that many of us or most of us are able to kind of just, like ignore the mechanics of it, and it forces you to see, right? Does that take away from the kind of luftig, spiritual Mashiach? You know what I'm saying?
So for me, there's definitely a little dose of cynicism that comes with it because of what you see in the world. I think part of that came to me with losing my mother. My mother died when I was 29 years old. She was 54.
So after you went on shlichus?
After I went on shlichus. She didn't want me to move to Montana. She
was ill when you left?
She was sick for on and off between remission, but she started she had a 12 years on and off with cancer. Mm-hmm. So she started, I was in Shir Aleph Zal and finished in the winter of...
Saying she didn't want you to leave for this reason?
No, she said, why Montana? You could find a shlichus in New Jersey, in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. And she had this this very casual, frank Crown Heights perspective. Like, she loved her kid going on shlichus. I was very close to my mother. I was a mama's boy. But, like, why do you have to go to Montana? And I said to her, they're offering me Vietnam or Montana. She goes, like, fine, go to Montana. But, funny, I'll tell you a funny story. When Chesky was a shtickle ben bayis for a while, Chesky Wolf.
Yeah.
He came to my house a lot. My mother was very kind, to all my friends that would come around. And one day he says, Mrs. Bruk, I just want you to know I'm opening a Chabad house in Montana. And my mother answered, Messiach Lefituma, she says, why aren't you going on shlichus? She said it like a crown, like with the pshittas of a crown. My son's in Montana. You're going to Manhattan.
Manhattan.
He said, I'm opening Chabad house in Manhattan. Sorry, he said, I'm opening Chabad house in Manhattan. And she responded, like, why aren't you going on shlichus? So this is a side note. But I think that
regards to Chesky. Shout out to Chesky.
100%. Always to Chesky. But I think that's it's a when you lose a mother and you see her suffer for that long and you're very close to her. And I mean like super close, you have a lot of questions. I said to my community after my mother passed away, I'm really lucky that I finished that JLI course right before she died. The JLI course, mamash before she passed away, was, I think it was the Soul Quest course, which was about all the medical halacha stuff, about end of life issues, and when you are allowed to end life and not end life. I'm like, if I would have had to give the class after she passed away, I think I'd have a different opinion on so many of these issues. A personal, not halachic opinions, but it would be very hard for me to stand up there with fire and brimstone and say it with a chai. So to answer your question, yes, when you're schlepped into that world of human suffering, of the nitty gritty, of the conversations about, what goes on in people's bedrooms and what goes on in people's personal lives that are challenging, for me, the only way I can 10 minutes later get back to my day job, because normally it happens smack in the middle of when I'm doing everything else, is I push it, have to blank it out. I block it out as if it, I did what I did. I gave them the recommendation. I hooked them up with the doctor and I let it go from there, because my job is only at the initial stages once I get them hooked up. And then I really try to block it out and remember and remind myself that the Eibishter has a plan.
But do you feel like you would have been a more chassidish yid? Or a more like connected shliach if things had just kind of gone smoothly? Do you feel that this is because I think
maybe the chitzonius would be more chassidish yid.
Right.
There's no question that my emunah and bitachon of the Eibishter would be nowhere where it is today, because to have emunah and bitachon and the way I live my life today and based on my life experience and our journey, you have to be rock solid. There's no ifs or buts about it.
Right.
We live by the motto of that Shmuel Gerari story of Shmuel Gerari.
Yeah.
Right. The miracle is that I'm still a chassid.
Right.
And I love that story.
I love that story.
Tell the
story.
So I may butcher a little bit. Rabbi Shmuel Gerari was a chassid in Ukraine. He was once sitting around with a bunch of other chassidim from different dynasties, probably some of my cousins that were ger or something. And they each talking about a miracle of their Rebbe, the Vishnitz and the Gera and this one. Everyone had a story. And it came to his turn. He said, yeah, my Rebbe, I think it was the Rebbe Rashab, maybe the Rebbe Marash, there was a big investment in a forest, and he told me to do the investment, and I did. I put the Hain Otzov, I think was the Lashon over there. And that winter, the river froze. We couldn't transport the lumber. We lost all our money. And they're all looking at him like, what's the miracle? To which he responded, the miracle is that I'm still a chassid. And for Chavie and I, that has really been the motto. Being a chassid from Giluyim, because the Rebbe gave you everything you ever asked for, and your life is hunky-dory, therefore you could be high as a kite on every yom of the Pagra, and you can leave your house 18 times a year to travel to the oil, to travel to the Rebbe.
On a private jet?
No, I'm talking about even the one sitting in coach in row 38, near the toilet in the back of the plane, but you're going and you're fabringing and you wait 3 days before Pesach, you're in New York for Alf Nissen, and then you're there again for Chav Chesiv and Gimel Tammuz. Every 5 minutes you're at the oil.
Right.
There's a part of me that envies that. There's another part of me that wonders how.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Either you got nothing going on in your shlichus, or you have no challenges in your life.
Right.
Because even if I wanted to,
right,
it's pasha not shaykh.
Right.
So if you're looking for Giluyim, it's true that without knowing all of this stuff, I used to go, when I go to yard site for New York, I daven 770 at the Amit sometimes for my mother's yard site. I used to see Rapinya Korf sitting there. He had a crowd of guys, 4 or 5 chevra. He used to look at the Torah was in the morning.
Right.
It was so...
I know. I remember you talking about.
So fascinating to me. First of all, he taught it in English, which in itself rocked the house for me.
Yeah, and it wasn't a very convincing English.
But every time I looked at him, I was like, what is that like to live in a world where you don't know what Rush Limbaugh said? Actually, you don't know who Rosh Limbaugh is. What is it to live in a world where you don't care, about the election, or you don't know what's cooking, and you're not dealing with other people's, you're dealing with your own struggles. Everyone has, even the big chassidim Yidden have their own struggles.
Right.
But you're not dealing with the nitty gritty. And then reality kicks back in. Okay, it was nice having that moment staring at Rapinya. Now let's go back to reality. So I think that you have to be a chassid in Giluyim, there's no question. You have to live b'chitzainis as a chassid. But we can't do that at the expense of the etzem. And if you want to find etzem, it's not when everything's smooth sailing.
Right.
If you want to get the essence and know if you're really a chassid, and you want to know if you're really connected to something higher than yourself, it can only come to fruition when everything you expected out of life and everything they told you was supposed to happen if you follow X program doesn't, and it doesn't affect that relationship, or at least doesn't affect it long term to the point where it's destroyed.
Right.
And so when you asked me earlier in this conversation, in this Fabreng, and you said, when I came back to Montana and shlichus right after our diagnosis with infertility, did it affect my relationship with the Rebbe? It didn't. Because the Eibishter's plan, the Rebbe doesn't make the plans. The Eibishter makes the plans. The Rebbe tries to intercede, and if the Eibishter says no, it's no. I still remember.
So did it affect your relationship with God?
It had not long term, but yeah, sure.
At the time?
Sure. Like, what you got to tell. What's your plan here?
Right.
So are we going to go down the plan where the next 40 years we're going to just do infertility treatments because someone told us that?
Right.
Or are we going to accept the reality? And that's also a challenge to know when to accept. When is it a challenge? When is it a reality you're supposed to accept? And when is it a challenge you're supposed to overcome?
Right. Exactly.
It's a big, and by the way, part of that issue is that I never really had a mashpia. I know we talk about this concept of Seil Charab and having a mashpia, but I was Chaim Shaul Bruk. Like, who am I going to sit down with and talk heart to heart with someone that I can actually be real with?
Right.
It wasn't until after I was married on shlichus in Montana.
You found the mashpia.
I could say, I have an uncle named Chaim Shaul.
Oh, okay.
And I called him, I said, this is not a request, I'm stating a fact. You are hereby appointed as my mentor, and you're going to be the mentor for myself and for our household. And Chavie accepts that as well. Therefore, if we have a shaila about...
he would have been difficult to... He would have said no if you weren't so direct with him?
I don't know. But I wasn't really... I didn't have any other options.
You had no choice.
I couldn't have an option where he says no.
Right, I see.
So for over, I don't know, probably 15 years now, when we have not a shlichus question, should I have a mixed dinner or not dinner? I'll call Rabbi Krinsky for that. I'll call someone in the world of shlichus.
Right.
If I have a question about my avodah, if I have a question about my raising my children, the chinuch of my children, I have a question about shalom bayis, when I have a question about chumras versus not, this is where you have to have Pashat, a mentor that can guide you and put you in the right track. And you know that when he tells you what he tells you, whether you like it or not, or whether you have to accept it as if it came directly from the Rebbe, which means I accept it without question. Had I wished I had that at a younger age, sure, but like every good thing in life, it doesn't always happen at the right time, the right place. But if you're going to have one, you have to have one that's confident enough to tell you what they think and not give you 6 options. No, I need someone with clarity.
Right.
And he gives me clarity.
Right.
But that has guided me in situations where, I think it's one of the things our community loves most about us is that we don't hide our personal struggles.
Right.
Our community knows that we struggle with infertility. It's not exactly a secret. Our community knows that we have struggles with children. They know our struggles. Not every detail, but they know that we're human beings that struggle.
Right.
And so when I give a sermon about emunah, or I give a sermon about shliach pratis, or I give a sermon about midas tovas, I'm not just talking to them. I'm talking to myself, and they've seen the changes.
Right.
And so it's the definition of being a chassid is growth. What does it say in Ayimim there about knowing milas atzmi, chesroinus atzmi? You got to know who you really are. You got to know what your flaws are.
Right. And
then you got to work to make yourself better. And sometimes if you don't do it on your own, the Eibishter works it out, and he gives you such gifts that you're going to figure out a way to become more sensitive. Right? Chaim Shaul Bruk would never become, I don't want to sound like Donald Trump talking in third person. I would never become sensitive if everything was Giluyim and my life was, I was in at the oil for 50, right? I'd still probably be sitting by the Fabrengens with the oil, bombarding somebody for some sacrilegious thing they did on Chavches Tevis.
Right.
They forgot that it was...
Yeah, look, this is one of the things people have asked me. You talk to these people on the podcast, like what has changed your thinking? Like, I mean, many things have changed how I think because of these conversations. Believe it or not, I do some listening while I'm talking. Everything I talk maybe sometimes a little bit too much, but I also do some listening. And then on top of that, I have to review it before I publish it. So I listen to everybody that talks twice.
Lucky you.
Yeah. Forget about the fact that I have to listen to myself at least once, right? But when I edit a film, I listen to the person 3 or 4 times. The podcast is already,
only once.
Only once. It's not a paid gig. I'm not doing it more than once. Anyhow. But so there are many things that get into your system, whether even when I don't always realize it at the moment, but it gets in there. But one of the things that I've been paying more and more attention to is, and I tell people it's a real cause for optimism. When you talk to people, it's listening to all these people has made me more optimistic. Why? Because someone gave me a rah-rah speech that got me all juiced up. No, not really, because that stuff lasts for a day and then goes away. I am too cynical for that, sadly. Or not sadly, whatever, just how I am. But it's a realization that at the end of the day, people are people, right? And for all the talk of being above everything, we're not above everything, right? And people have to deal with, every Lubavitcher has to deal with their themselves, their health, their marriage, their children, the day-to-day stuff. And you could say, well, why is that optimistic? That schleps you down. It's like, no. That forces us to get real. And when you're forced to get real, the beauty of getting real is, like you said before, it's like a fork in the road. Like you're forced to say, okay, I can't keep on going anymore this direction I was going. I either have to basically say, okay, I'm not up to it. I'm not up to this challenge, so I'm just going to basically realize that I have to go a different route, or I'm going to figure out a way to be up to it. But it's going to have to be in a different direction. It forces people to get real. Like if I'm going to be honest, after we got married, we went on shlichus, and it didn't work out the way I thought it would. Some of it was not my fault. Some of it was a typical shlichus kind of shenanigans of politics and shetach and stuff. But if I'm going to be honest, part of it was a realization, and the fundamental thing was a realization that I'm not all that interested like I thought I was. Meaning, when it didn't go smoothly, I looked at myself in the mirror and said, how much do I want this? And the answer was, not that much, right? And so I could blame other things as much as I want, and a lot of those things are like, there's validity to it, but at the end of the day, I was forced to reckon with, like, am I up to it or not? And my answer was no. So I went a different way. There are other things I would hope where I had a similar thing, and I went a better way as a result, right? But I'm just saying,
there's no question that when it comes to realism, there's a reason why I really have no tolerance for. First of all, I'm not on any WhatsApp groups. Besides, I have my 4 siblings and I have a group. And that I stay on there to keep the family unity, not because I think the specifics are that important. And we have a group for the 5 shluchim in Montana, which is very inactive, meaning we only talk when there's something to do with Jewish life in Montana. It's not a gossip machine.
Right.
I'm not in any other groups. I don't allow people to add me to groups. There's a setting for that. I'm not interested in it. I don't have, people. But do you see the new Chavie? Like, I don't know. I'm in Tafshin Yutes and Teres Menachem. I started in Tafshin Yud. It's taken me 8 years to get here. I'm pretty sure I have a lifelong journey till I get to Tafshin and Beis.
Yeah, I'll get back to you.
The Chavie that you discovered is really not high on my priority list. Or you have a discussion now because someone said that we might not be in Deira Shvi.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this podcast is guilty of that.
That's fine. I don't have... I have a Chabad house to run. I have children to raise. And I have a focus. I'm not sure why I should have time now to figure out if I'm on Deira Shvi or not. Does it even matter? Yes. Does it matter what Deira I'm in? I'm in the Deira that the Rebbe entrusted me to bring Mashiach.
Right.
You want to pick which generation is? Let me know which one it is, and I'll conform. And I have friends that take this stuff very seriously, and they have their own groups to discuss it. So I once in a while I tell them, just do me a favor, let me know what the conclusion was, so I know what generation we're in. I'll know.
Yeah,
but jokes aside,
there's never a conclusion.
So but that's the point, is that we get caught up in the arum.
Yeah.
And when you have that realism perspective, like, we have a job to do. Life is limited.
Right.
You know, I'm 43 years old. I got Eibish's on my bench to have arichas yom v'shanim tovas, but I don't want to spend my life arguing about whether we're in Deir HaShvi or not. I don't think that's valuable in my time. It was, I think 10 years ago, I was at the Kinnos or something, and they were doing sign-ups for the Kfar Chabad magazine. I felt bad for the guy signing up, so I said, sure, for I think it was $200. I begged him after the year. I said, I'll still pay you. Could you just stop sending it to me? I realized that it's wasting my time. I'm reading articles on Bet Chabad in Kochav, Moshav, whatever.
Right.
I'm like, it's not relevant to me. I'm sure the shluchim are doing wonderful things. I don't want them to spend time reading about my Chabadas either.
Right.
So I think a prioritization of where we spend our time. So if shliach Montana is on the group and he needs something, that's what I'm here for. Hineni.
Right.
And any time of the day, you're part of Team Montana. By the way, if a shliach anywhere needs me, I'm happy to help him. I don't need a group for that.
Right.
The realism is not a negative. It's creating priorities and a focus of where are we going? What are we doing?
Well, that's what pain is, right? I don't mean to get on the pain train here and make, like, pain has in a way become itself romanticized, but that's what pain is. It's a body telling you, pay attention to this thing. Like, put everything to the side. You want to go on with your life, but your leg is broken, or there's something wrong with your stomach, right? Like pay attention to it, right? Pain is that awareness that there's a problem that you need to fix, right? And that is the importance of pain. We were talking earlier about the pain that people go through personally, the context of pain, like the Rebbeim whether they were deeply, deeply sensitive people. Just by the fact of what they did, I'm not speculating here about their personas. Just the nature of their job was tremendous empathy for people. Like, they were forced into it, right? Velva Lipsker.
But that's where you put your money where your mouth is.
Right.
If you don't believe in this stuff, then you get to hear all that pain, and you're done. You can't handle it. A normal human being.
That's what I'm saying.
But they didn't do that because they actually took everything they studied.
But that's a context of chassidus. Right?
Sure.
That's a concept. So my point is, like, the concept of chassidus is you don't shy away from reality.
Of course.
Right? When because pain is reality telling you that this is a real thing. Right? When you feel pain for someone, that's because you've allowed the reality to enter your space, and you're not trying to dismiss it with ideas and a nice turn of phrase.
Montana was for many, the first Merker Shluchim recorded coming to Montana was in 1956. Professor Irving Block, my wife's grandfather.
How about that?
And Rabbi Yamin Klein, the Rebbe's secretary. Two guys who didn't speak the same language. It was fantastic. One guy came from Tennessee, the other guy came from Yerushalayim. They probably didn't know how to talk to each other, which, by the way, for Merker Shluchim probably worked out really well.
Yeah.
Greyhound buses, Billings, Butte, Montana. And so, but Merker Shluchim were coming for a long time. So Rabbi Shalom Bruk in the 70s moved to Washington State, and he oversaw the Pacific Northwest, and he would send Bachram from the yeshiva in Seattle back in the day, like Bachram like Yankee Tauber, who are Merker Shlichus in Montana. Yeah, it was fascinating stories. My Shver, Chaim Block, and Aaron Slonim did a summer camp in Great Falls in Montana. And then Moshe Feller once came from Minnesota to Malmstrom. It's one of those states that the Head Shluchim were fighting who shouldn't be in charge of it, like Mississippi. Louisiana and Tennessee are fighting who Mississippi doesn't belong to.
Right.
And but in modern day, the closest shliach that ever dealt with Jews in Montana in the modern era was Benny Zippel in Utah.
Right.
So he moved to Utah in Tafshinum Beis. He was the last shliach to go out. Chavav Adar.
Oh yeah.
He got $1 to go to Utah, and the next day was the stroke, and he didn't know himself what to do. And I think Rabbi Kotlarski told him to get moving.
Right.
So he moves to Salt Lake. He was in touch with, I don't know, a couple, maybe 2 million of Jews in Montana that reached out to him, and they were on the mailing list. And right in the beginning of my shlichus one day, we were talking, and he was like an older brother mentor that I spoke to a lot. I still do. And he said, Chaim Shaul, I have a new gvir, a billionaire. I'm a young kid. I'm excited. Goes, he's richer than I still remember. He said richer than Bloomberg. I said, Benny, who's hanging out? And he dragged it along, and then finally he said, it's Melech Malchei Malachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he really, with that little anecdote, ingrained in me as a young shliach that I should not get caught up in the business of supporters and how much money they have and who's in charge and what if someone else takes $1 from them. There's an Eibishter that decides where the money's being allocated, and don't ever forget that in the process. And really, when I look around Montana, right, I had Chabad of Montana had supporters in Missoula, in Kalispell, in Billings, not millions of dollars, but for a small moiset in a state that's rural, bringing in $40,000 a year from different parts of the state, and then saying, if I put a shliach there and I'm not going to raise money in that area anymore, it could affect me financially.
Right.
And then you ask yourself, hold on, you sit a whole day talking about Hazonas Ha'olam Kulei B'Turi V'Chein V'Chesed V'Rachim, every benching. We talk about B'Tochim, we learn Shar B'Tochim, the Rebbe talks about it a whole day. Tanya.
Right.
And I'm over 20 grand, I'm going to be Menei Bar from 500 Jews to have a shliach.
Right.
So I think in life, it's a little too much to expect Bachrim at 15, 16 years old to really be inoculated and, really understand. I mean, Midas Torah should be a given.
I don't think it's too much to expect. That's actually it's something that I've disagreed with a number of people. I don't know if it's been on the podcast.
I don't have a deep philosophy.
No. I'm not saying I've disagreed with you, but you brought it up. It's a debate that I've had with a number of people, and I usually find myself disagreeing. Look, it's one thing to say that you can't expect Bachrim to really understand what you're talking about. You're going to talk about Shalom Bayis. What's a Bachrim about Shalom Bayis? You're going to talk to a Bachar about... it's a lot of it's abstract, yes. But that therefore you should infantilize them and like just cut off this whole language from Bachrim, because Bachrim at 15... First, two things. They're smarter than you give them credit for.
Especially these days.
B, you're not getting another shot with them. This idea that, when they're 23, it's like if a parent has a young child and says, you know what, my child's 8 years old now. They don't really understand much, so I'll wait till they're 15 to actually have a relationship with them. Okay, good luck with that, right?
Well, the parents they're going to... I meet sometimes secular parents, they're going to let their kids when they're 18 decide if they should have a bris.
Right.
That's going to work out really well for you.
Right. Exactly, right? That's one of the reasons why when it comes to a bris, the father has a chiyuv right away to do it. It's the father's chiyuv, right? Like there is sometimes a desire to not make the tough choice. Let my kid make the choice. It's like, no. There's an urgency to it. We don't have this luxury of waiting for the time to arrive when they get to their, no, it doesn't work that way. And so when it comes to Bachrim, no, why shouldn't Bachrim be taught when you're in yeshiva? Why shouldn't you be taught that Chassidus, and you start off the conversation this way, why shouldn't you be taught what it says in Chassidus? That the whole point of Chassidus is l'shanis tev mideisav, right? The whole point of Chassidus is to take a midah of achzarius, which is, some people have it more, some people have it less, everybody has their challenge, but it's not like an unhuman thing to be born with a streak of cruelty and bullying and these things, right?
Teaching them that Dr. Doomstein is wrong and Dr. Miros is right, and that Dr. Doomstein can go do tshuva and go to yeshivas Eish Sameach. And this is basic. And this is.
I'm not familiar with the whole Dr. Miros universe. Fair. Maybe I should, but I'm saying okay, say there, no problem. But I'll ask my kids. They're very particular about their music.
There was once a group here from Muncie, a summer camp of Bachrim, I think 15 to 17 years old. And they were with us for Shabbos. It was in my house. It was a crazy Shabbos. We had 70 tourists. And the head of the camp, Rabbi Moskowitz, asked me if I could...
Was it a Lubavitch camp?
No. Litvish camp.
Right.
Asked me if I could speak to the kids b'shal Shudas.
Okay.
Sure. So I don't know how we got to what the topic was. It was on Pirkei Avos, and I said something...
You told Lubavitchers don't do shal Shudas.
I let them even sing their Zmiras with pleasure. I still don't know the words, but they're still welcome to sing it. So I said to the kids, I don't know how it came. In the context of my thing, I said, if you're driving on the street or walking down the street and you see a pretty girl,
right,
and you turn around to look, that means you're healthy.
Right.
But then there's something called Shmiras Einayim, and there's something called the Skafi, depending on what terms you want to use. So if you can't turn away and therefore you crash your car, then you need to get help.
Right.
In other words, there's the human aspect of it,
right,
and then there's the avodah of looking away.
Right.
We don't talk in those terms.
No.
And the challenge with that is, how do you expect someone to deal with the real world, to deal with the world that has
That's exactly what
the
I'm
internet,
saying.
pornography, God knows, addictions from Allah Zayten, and we're not talking a language. Now, I'm not a mechanech, and I don't know exactly how to go about it in these yeshivas, but I still remember I was 20, 21, 22 years old, and I worked in Monsey Yeshiva then when you were there.
I remember, oh yeah.
So-
we remember driving. Do you remember that we drove and we
Your grandfather.
No.
Oh, we drove off the Jersey Garden State Parkway.
We were driving in the snow.
Said, hold on tight.
We're driving in the snow, and for some reason, probably
We slid on. We went on black ice.
I know, but it was a snowy day. For whatever reason, there was probably a tight budget, and so you rented the smallest car. It was a Toyota Corolla, driving in the snow. I'm a kid from Hong Kong. I don't know what snow is.
Don't worry, I was a kid from Grand Heights. I didn't know.
Stay there, and we're driving down the 87 or the Palisades.
Garden States.
It's a Garden State
Parkway.
And it's like there's two sides of the highway with a
Ravine.
with a ravine in the middle, and we literally just all of a sudden you hit snow and black ice, and we weren't driving fast. I remember I remember to this day. And just like we slid down the whole ravine,
and continued going the other way,
and ended up on the other side, and it just kept on going.
I thought you meant so your grandfather came because of you for your Dalit Kislev, your grandfather Rebbe Shem Tov, and I drove him back.
But I wasn't with you there.
I I drove him back to 706 Eastern Parkway. I still remember 5 o'clock in the morning.
No, that wasn't that. You were going to pick up Rabbi Garari for I guess Yudis Kislev.
Anyhow, it was. But my point is, when in Monsey, I still remember I was sitting in the back of the Zal for the Bachram, and Reb Nuchem Greenwald from Monsey was giving a shir.
Right.
I wasn't really listening.
Right.
But somehow I listened to one line, and my ears perked up. And I'm like, he just ruined everything. What did he say? He said, sometimes people complain that they daven to the Eibishter didn't answer their prayers. He said, he didn't answer the prayers. He said, no.
Right.
And I was 22.
Right.
And it agaharget the ganz Yiddishkeit. What do you mean the Eibishter said no?
Right.
I grew up that we have a Rebbe and we have an Eibishter and they are ATM machines. If you put in the code,
right,
the cash is coming out.
Right.
Comes along this guy from Lakewood. I said, he ain't one of us because he just ruined the whole thing.
Right.
The Eibishter says no, except that's the essence of it all. What are you? How do you show up in your life, in your relationship with Hashem, in your relationship with the Rebbe, when the answer is no? Right. Is your iskashrus one of Giluyim? Was your iskashrus something of Etzem? And all the fluff around everything. If you stay with the Rebbe...
Okay, but let me push back a bit. Yeah. Even the Giluyim and Etzem talk that you're bringing up, right? That's a language that a lot of people use.
Right.
A lot of people use it in different directions, right? So there'll be someone who will say, Giluyim was when you lived in the Mems. Etzim is a iskashrus of today. Another person will say, Giluyim is when you do something that makes sense to you. Etzim is when you have Kabbalah soil.
So I'm saying Giluyim and Etzim is in you. I'm not talking about anything to do with anyone else.
I understand what you're saying.
Are you living a life where you see yourself and your connection to anything holy?
Right.
From a perspective of Giluyim, which means you're setting yourself up for failure and disappointment.
Right.
Or you're from the lucky few that can go to the oil 50 times a year and it doesn't affect anything, whatever that means. Or are you building within yourself from the age of teenage years or even from childhood a recognition, the Shmuel Garai recognition,
right,
that there's nothing greater in my life than to be of service to bring Mashiach in connection to the incredible mandate and gift that the Rebbe has given us, whether that plays out how we want life to play out or not.
Right.
Right. I asked my mashpia recently. I was in New York and I didn't have koyach. I didn't have koyach, and I bet there's a lot of people that have this question, but they won't talk about it. I didn't have koyach to sit down and write a 45-page pan with the amount of things going on in Chabad of Montana and the amount of things going on in my life. It takes a lot of focus and energy to put that all in writing.
Right.
So an hour or two before I went to the oil, I asked my mashpia, is it okay to just go into the oil and talk to my boss? I work for the man. I've been working in Montana for 18 years. I love him. I adore him. I think, like my Bubby used to say about the Rebbe, and I know I can get in a lot of trouble for this. When my Bubby asked the Goldman, she's not alive anymore, so you can fight it out with her. She goes, he's such a gentleman. What are they doing to him? And she would always tell that to me. She's like, couldn't handle all the insanity that they used to do around the Rebbe because you're taking away this incredible personal Rebbe that I have.
Yeah.
So for me, I just want to know, is it okay if I go in and just have a heart-to-heart conversation? And his recommendation was that 100% is no issue. Just write down notes for yourself so you don't end up going in the oil and forgetting the things you want to share. But,
so you went into the oil and you actually said it, or you thought it in your mind?
I had a conversation. Not a loud conversation.
You whispered it out.
I had my verbal, not my silent verbal conversation.
You thought in your mind as if you're having a conversation.
Correct. And I went through item by item in our Chavie, and it doesn't mean I never, of course I write many times to the oil. That day it wasn't working.
Right.
But when you sit at a Fabrengen, and instead of talking about the stuff that are really on our minds, the stuff that are really affect us on a day-to-day basis, right? If someone gets up and says, God forbid, that learning Shleisha Prakim Ram, we just started Kiddush HaChedesh today.
Right.
So the epitome of my Mesiras Nefesh for Maimonides kicked in this morning, and I have issues. Right. I have issues every year, and it's not just with Kiddush HaChedesh. Kiddush HaChedesh is just either I'm too dumb, or I don't have the bittul of sitting for 4 hours to listen to Rabbi Lush with his big ball over there, with his globe. Yeah. I know, it's not my thing. Astronomy, math, astrology, it's nish mein Geschäft. It just doesn't work for me. My son loves math. My father loves math. I just don't know what they want from me.
Yeah.
Why can't we talk about that at Fabrengen? Instead of sitting at a Fabrengen and talking about some lofty topic.
Yeah.
That I don't even relate to. And the Ave zum Rebbe is Ave betanugim. I'm like, what do you want from me? And who you think I was there by the Rebbe.
Yeah.
Do you think a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, or even 20-year-old knows what in God's earth you want from them? You don't even know what you want from them. You learned Tanya that morning. You saw 2 fancy words. You made a mushal from God knows where, and here we are. Yeah. Let's spend 4 hours discussing nothingness.
Right, nothingness.
Or singing a camp song.
Yeah.
Actually, the camp songs have some teichen, at least it involves some yearning. You're still bulbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so to me...
So I'll tell you why we can't talk about Fabrengen.
Why?
And I'm just reflecting back what we've been saying the whole time. The answer is what we've been talking about. Because we have in our minds, for whatever reason, this pressure. Maybe it's because we have in our mind the chassidim back in the day, they didn't deal with the same exact crap that we're dealing with now. Like
I said, the Goldman used to tell me, the main says in Atvotsk, they didn't sleep in.
Yeah,
he always told me.
Of course they slept in. And
the bomb was coming over.
And there are stories of chassidim who are older than us. Some of them are very central chassidim in Der Shvi, and I'm sure there are in previous days that we don't know about. That I don't know about, that struggled the same struggle of infertility that you're talking about, and they suffered the same way
in silence.
No, but the story. I think Rebbe would ask the Rebbe every year or something until the Rebbe told him, that I'm also like that's a story that goes. Right? I mean, Rebbe Yisrael.
It goes on and on.
Yeah, and people. So but we have in our mind that they didn't deal with it, or if they dealt with it, they somehow
did it in a holier way.
A holier way. And so we have this pressure that if we're going to come to Fabrengen and we're going to talk about the prosaic stuff of life, like I really, I don't do Rambam anymore.
I want you to know that I'm struggling with my children.
Yeah.
Instead of bottling it up and taking medication to dull the pain.
Right.
Gidalti bonim v'remamtim, right? V'hem pishuvi, v'hem pashuvi, whatever the lashon over there is in the...
Right.
You never see a guy sit down and break down in tears, because first of all, they're probably scared to, because there'll be no one that really empathizes with them.
Right.
I was once standing and I found out that a shliach in a state very far from me, who's much older than me, he has a child, I think his 8th or 9th child is severe special needs.
Right.
No one knows about it.
Right.
And I saw him and I found out financially he's struggling. And I called a couple of chaver that have a few dollars. Like, let's just send the guy like 10 grand. It's not going to solve his problem, but let him at least know that someone gives a damn.
Let him breathe for a day.
Let him know that someone gives a damn.
Right.
He has a successful Chabad house, but you know what it means to have a child at his age, at 55 years old, to wake up and realize now for the rest of your life, you're going to be raising a child with special needs. You can have 32 friendship circles and yachad, and it doesn't change. You can call them Mitziyanim 200 different times.
I hate that whole movement. It's ridiculous.
My point is, when we hide the struggle, whether it's personal avodah struggles or it's the challenges of life or the challenges of life on shlichus,
right?
We're not doing anyone any favors.
No.
Our community, number one, is not fooled. It's like when someone tells the community the rabbi's only taking a salary of $42,000. Right. You don't think the guys in the community think it's shliach? They did $42,000, but you have 2 boxes of diapers and 3 boxes of materna, and you're done.
Right. Right.
So we live in this denial reality, or at least a hiding. And when I get the calls from people, and I say to them, "Do your parents know?" I once had a couple on the phone, and I said, "Do your parents know?" And they said, "No, we would never tell them." I said, "What do you mean you never tell them?" First people that I turned to when we were struggling was Chavie turned to her parents, I turned to my parents, and maybe we're very lucky like that. They won't understand. One person said to me, "Oh yeah, my mother-in-law is saying Tillim for us." I said, "How's that feel?"
Right.
Like, not good. We're dealing with a struggle. I understand they mean well.
Right.
But from that whole mentality of keeping a secret, nothing good comes from it. Now, I don't think you need to flaunt all your issues.
Right.
Like my brother always says, not everything's trauma. Everything's trauma.
Right.
No, by the way, and I
No, but let me put some meat on the bone here. There's no argument here that I hear that every Fabringen should be about this. That what's a chassidish Fabringen? It's talking about your kids' struggles. That's not the art. But it is possible, like that could be a kind of Fabringen, right? Like that doesn't have to be every Fabringen.
no, not at all.
Right? But like the idea that, you could even go extreme. You come to the oil, Gimel Tammuz. It's not something that Shabbos Gimel Tammuz. It's not really I'm not part of that scene anymore, but I don't have any, I'm not mocking it. Like I know that people come, and for them it's a very serious day, and then they're coming there to be uplifted and to be connected, and I say that with all sincerity, right? And you come, and you're coming in your mind, the Fabringen is going to be about hiskashrus and this and that and the other thing, and again, I'm not making fun, but you sit down with a friend and the conversation goes to what you're talking about. It's completely possible that you sitting and listening to your friend talk about his tsaras, right, and lending an ear, and being mechazik however you can, that is a chassidish Fabringen. It's a kind of chassidish Fabringen, at least, right?
There's a chassid that I like. His name is Michal Danov from Leeds, England.
Okay.
He's an old school type of chassid. He's not an old school man. He's probably in his early 50s, mid 50s. And you said mamash this. I mean, it was not Shabbos Gimel Tammuz, but it was Gimel Tammuz. And I got out of the line. I finished. I was at the oil. I was waiting to go back to the airport for my 6 a.m. flight back to Montana. I sat down next to him.
And you know him from before?
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Sure. We're not the same age, but he used to come to my house with his friend Shaul Wilhelm, who's my first cousin back in the day. So there's a connection to my family a little bit, and I have a lot of admiration for him, and I think he's the real deal.
Right.
And I don't think that about many people. I think for me, seems authentic and real, and he knows that I think that. And probably, as we speak right now, he's cringing from this, but it's okay. I sat down next to him.
Well, why do you suspect that he listens to this podcast?
I suspect most people who say they don't do.
I don't know that he doesn't, but...
And I'm sitting there, and ich weiß gesagt der Herzen. There was a lot going on in my life, and instead of him educating me, which he could,
right,
and quoting to me the Sikha from Tafshalam and Zayin, the point that Rebbe mentioned,
right,
that's not what I want to hear.
Right.
I actually don't want to hear anything.
Right.
I want you to care.
Right.
And he did that night. He ended up sharing something. He has a child that has its own struggles, and he shared that with. I left back to the airport. I wrote a weekly email that week about it, because he knew that you're a real person. You showed up, but I don't think he realized how much I needed that in that moment, because I'm not a guy that's going to grab the microphone at the oil and I don't want to sit in front of a bunch. I don't want to be judged.
Right.
No one likes to be judged.
Right.
But one-to-one, heart-to-heart, where I can do that, and it meant everything.
Yeah.
And I think that commercialized chassidus is to the detriment of all of us.
Yeah.
Because if we can't internalize it and we can't implement it in the real moments when our brothers and sisters need it, and they just need us to shut up and to listen, or they're not asking for, they're not asking for our solutions. They just want to know that we care.
Right.
And you say, well, what does it matter if I care? No, it's like in a marriage. Sometimes your wife doesn't, she knows there's no solutions because there's no money in the bank. She just wants you to recognize
that it hurts her.
That she would like to really buy something for Yontif, and you're a loser that hasn't made any money, so therefore she can't.
Right.
Or that she recognizes that how hard it is, but she just wants she wants to know that you care and that you recognize that. And we all fail at that sometimes. In our friendships, in our chaverschaps, in our I had friends in yeshiva.
I'm thinking as you're saying this, it hit me just so hard right now, because we're framing it like the Fabringens at the oil or whatever.
Or yeshiva.
No, I'm not picking on the oil.
That's where I would go to Fabringen.
Fakert, I'm saying like the oil is a place where I've seen people like they're there very sincerely. People like it's like. I'm saying it with a lot of respect. And if for someone else it's in 770, fine. I'm not. But I'm saying it respectfully, not too much. But I'm saying you could be sitting at the oil. I could completely see a Fabringen at the oil where someone tells someone a story about a yechidus where a chassid came into the Rebbe and poured out his heart, and the Rebbe listened to him and said a vart that told him that I care. And that would be a chassidish Fabringen. But if I do that,
then it's treif.
Not treif, but what are we doing here? That's what we came to the oil for. We came to the oil to listen to somebody else talk. We didn't come to. Yeah. But that's what it's about.
But that's the issue, is that so often we're not comfortable being us. We're too concerned about what the outcome will be. Will it hurt more if I do say something? Will people listen? Will people care?
Yeah, fair. I think here it's more specific. It could be.
Two years ago, Lag Ba'omer, I was dealing with a issue here with one of my children, and it was pretty severe. A ruchnisdike issue, not a gashmisdike issue. And I was invited to come not long after that to a chasana that a very dear friend of mine made. And across the country, I had a ticket. I was ready to go. And a week into this episode, I just realized I am not capable of going to be Mesameach, my friend. I'm not capable of even getting on a plane to go dance at a simcha. Maybe that's my fault, maybe that's my flaw, but I'm just not in a place for that.
Right.
So I called my friend, one of my closest friends, and I said, I just don't think I can do it. And instead of judging me, and instead of trying to, F-ship forward, maybe you'll be able to last minute, It was like, Chaim Shaul, don't come. I know what you're going through because this person didn't know what I was dealing with. There'll be another simcha. Do what you got to do and take care of yourself and take care of your family. And I was sitting in my car and I still remember like the feeling of like the bricks coming off my heart. Like, thank God he didn't try pressuring me.
Right.
I would handle it, but it would have been so painful.
Right.
Because I just wanted him to know how much I wanted to be there and how much it just simply didn't make sense at that moment. My hope, and I think you're right, I think these conversations, I think that's why when Barry Farkash was on your podcast, I think that was the first time I listened to one of them, and then I heard Chaim Drizin and many others since. I think the reason it's so powerful these days is because the world is yearning for authenticity. And everything has become so commercialized, and we think we have to have an opinion that has to fit a certain box.
Right.
I still remember, I'm allowed to say this, when I was in Luden Yeshiva, 1998, Tafshin and Ches, I came late to Yeshiva. It was a last minute thing. I joined some of my classmates, Nachum Feldman, Mendy Pekarsky, Shlomo Lvovsky. We had Yankee Klein there that year. There was others. But I ended up in a room with a kid named Kasnopolsky from Sydney, a kid named Shlomo Kaddish, who was a Sephardi from Rehovot, and Shneir Kupchik, who is the non-official Chabad representative mushroom in New Delhi, India.
Yeah.
I was his roommate for a year.
Uh-huh.
We fought like cats and dogs.
Uh-huh.
And Mashiach was only one of the topics we fought about. I was American, he was from Tzfas. It was very different levels of hygiene. We had different world views. But you can't help being a guy's roommate for a year.
Right.
You get to know a guy. You think if I see Shneir Kupchik on the street, I'm not going to talk to him?
Yeah.
So I still remember, fast forward 10 years, I'm standing at 7-7, and I see Shneir Kupchik walking by. We end up talking for 25 minutes and chatting about life in New Delhi, life in Montana. And I still remember one of my friends from Detroit walking by, and I'm starting to get googly eyes. He didn't say anything. He was like, I'm like, the guy.
He's my roommate.
He's my roommate. This is Shneur Kutcher. Like,
right.
By the way, when Gabi Holtzberg was murdered in Mumbai, the first person I texted through Facebook Messenger was Shneur. He was already living in New Delhi.
Right.
And I thought what he was doing in New Delhi was totally crazy.
Right.
But he's my roommate, and he's in a country where they're murdering Lubavitchers.
Right.
And then I took my group from Montana to the Kinnos one year, and he was standing outside next to Mermelstein's over there, and he was walking by. This is my point is that we are meant to be real people, and we are meant to be honest people. And it doesn't always fit an agenda. It doesn't always fit in a box.
Life is messy.
And not only that, very good. And life throws at us stuff that takes us to places. I mean, if you look back at the last 2 hours of this conversation, people are going to listen. Some of them who haven't followed, haven't spoken to me in 20 years. Like, is this the same dude? Right? Is this the guy that I went to yeshiva with? Because he was a shtickle. It was not a shtickle. He was a bulvan.
I was in yeshiva. I can be made. Right. I was in yeshiva. I was a younger bacher, but you're not the same guy. I mean, on the surface.
No. But I think. Listen, a lot of the fanaticism of our youth, and a lot of the bombardment of our youth, where we took an opinion and we fought for it, it was all a facade. We all had insecurities. We all had issues that we were dealing with, and instead of dealing with the issues at hand,
right?
Instead of going to therapy or going to find a mashpia and talking about real life issues, we ended up getting
throwing stuff
and getting causes to who we're fighting for.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that is so key. And I think in that sense, you are right that the younger generation needs to hear it from a younger age, that midas tovus is not a crime, it's actually a value.
Right.
And Lashanas Teva Midoisav or Midoisav Ativim and all those discussions are not theoretical, they're practical. And Ranat should not stop before you get to Hecholtzu.
Right.
And Likutei Deburim is not something for the ancient archaic sages. It's actually printed beautifully in English and in Hebrew and Yiddish. It's something we should all be reading to learn about not having Midas Megunis and learning about that Bacher Erev Pesach, going through the Ktsiras Achitim until the Schwitzing and the Zeyashel Mitzvah of what we can become.
Right.
No one should have to wait till they're 35 or 30 and have gone through infertility and adoption and raising children with special needs and being on shlichus in Arei Asada to really awaken and realize that change is doable. And even if it's imperfect, because I think, no one's talking about perfection here. Just the constant work on
the process.
On the process and the value in that process. Isn't that the whole idea of a Beinoni and Tanya?
Yeah.
You may not win the war. It doesn't mean the battle isn't worthwhile.
Yeah. You have to wake up for battle every day.
So yes, you want to scream about the Rebbe and make someone uncomfortable because you don't think they're a big enough chassid. And by the way, and I didn't.
I mean, those people are also dealing with something. That's what they're doing. They're going through the same thing that you're talking about.
Right, but there's ways to deal with it in a healthier way.
Yeah, I'm saying that.
And Barry really addressed that.
I think, 100%.
Right, he said something to the effect that you probably remember the line about having a healthy nefesh habamis.
Yeah.
Right? There's having an unhealthy nefesh habamis and there's a healthy nefesh habamis.
No, but the line that he said was that a lot of the things that people think about by slach lanu, they should be thinking about by refoenu. Right? You're asking for forgiveness, and really you need
help.
You need help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Look, Yeah.
But listen, I am a big believer in Chabad in Lubavitcher chassidim. I think they are the most phenomenal group of people in the world, and I say that as someone that interacts with all flavors of Judaism. Right. I think what's been ingrained in us at the end of the day is just something. And I think if someone listened to the last couple of hours and they're like, "Oh no, this is not dirty laundry," and it's just a heart-to-heart conversation of how we can do better. But at the same time, we can't minimize the importance of the work that's necessary in being a chassid. You cannot be a chassid by osmosis. It doesn't work.
What I heard in this conversation was you talking. It was a testimony of a journey of going from someone who was caught up in almost in a trap of slogans.
Yeah.
And and words where words are supposed to express your feelings, not that your feelings are controlled by these words and lines and
two things to that.
What?
When I
defined. Like, well, what do those words mean? But it's a trap because the words are so compelling that they trap your feelings and your mind now gets twisted in a pretzel.
Two things on that. Number one is we grew up in yeshiva. This term came about and
voidness.
No.
Farmer. Moses him.
Farmer. If you live in Crown Heights, somehow you became a farmer. And old McDonald had a farm, and it was on President in Kingston.
Right.
And I was,
You're a farmer.
I used to tell my father that, in yeshiva they told me that you're a farmer. And I don't know exactly what that means because you work in jewelry, but sure. Old McDonald, old Levitcha had a farm.
Right.
And then it came time for me to move on shlichus. And I'm a Crown Heights boy. And I went to all those farmers. Right. Terrible, terrible people of Crown Heights. Right. I'm saying that sarcastically, obviously. And I raised a significant, and I mean, not like every other kid that shows up to Korea. I was a local kid.
Right.
So family, friends. I raised a significant amount of money in 2007 to open this Chabad house.
Right.
And it didn't take me 10 years to come to realization. I said to my friends then, we owe an apology to this community. It's not our fault. We didn't come up with the idea. We were brainwashed by our elders, but still.
Right.
Every one of them should have slammed the door in my face.
Right.
But they didn't. They supported, right, that growth in that Chabad house. That's A. The second one happened, my first Shabbaton in Montana. We spoke about today about Shabbatons. The first one was with Rabbi Yisrael and Vivi Darren.
Okay. She's been on the podcast.
I'm big fans of the Darrens, and so they came, and their son Mendy was not well at the time. It was a big mistake for them to come because they didn't know what the situation was.
They've been through,
Yeah. But we're driving, and I miscalculated. I flew them from Butte. It's 80 miles away because it was graduation weekend in Bozeman, and there was no tickets. So I flew them to Butte, and I miscalculated. And I was flying at like a tzedreit on the 90 to get them to the airport. And we were having an argument the whole way there, a political argument. And we didn't agree on something in Chabad headquarters, whatever. We were arguing. And Mrs. Darren got involved, and she defended her husband, and we were rocking and rolling. We got to the airport. The plane was fully boarded. TSA was closed down because it's one flight a day. So I came to the gate and said, guys, if they miss their flight to Salt Lake, they're never going to get back to Connecticut. Their son's in the hospital. It's Montana. They opened up TSA gate. They told Delta to hold the plane. They got them through. They got on their plane. A week later, I get an envelope in the mail, an unannounced envelope. I open it up. It's from Rabbi Yisrael Darren. It's a bumper sticker. It says, don't believe everything you think. And I had it hanging in my office for years.
Yeah, exactly.
That was his response to our whole war in the car. Like, do you think you have you have a slogan and you're fighting for a cause? Who do you think you're talking to? So we have Farmer and the Rebbe Hadas and the Rebbe Jens, and we have, get to the issue. The issue is you have Nefesh Adlikis and Nefesh Abamis, and they're trying to control you, and who's going to win that war, and how's that going to reflect in how you deal with your children, with your spouse, with your chaverim, with your fellow yeshiva, friends in yeshiva, with the next fabrengen. Are you a real chassid? Are you a mechol danav? Are you able to listen and empathize and be there for another chassid in their time of stress and struggle? Or is it all talk, and you're going to just sing another camp song of Rebbe, we need you, which is basically you're asking the Rebbe to fill your void instead of you operating as a filler of other people's voids. So
Yeah.
L'chaim.
Yeah. L'chaim L'bracha.
I think this is the longest fabrengen I've been at probably ever.
Yeah. L'chaim to that. L'chaim to everybody listening. Thanks for listening. All the best.
Zagazant.
The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentance Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.